What's up world? It's Willy What If here with another new video. Sorry about the channel disappearing, we ran into an issue with YouTube, but they realized their mistake and corrected it. Hopefully that will be the last time. This is episode 7 of What If Deku Gave Up on Being a Hero. It's a long and spicy one, so I hope you enjoy. Part 7. Izuku expected many things this morning when woke up and realized he needed to be at work in an hour and a half. No breakfast, feeling groggy, Himiko passive-aggressively asking him to maybe stay a little longer. Perhaps even coming in late if the trains were behind schedule. But one thing he was certainly not prepared for was getting called into his supervisor's office the second he clocked in and seeing the president of the company standing behind his boss and staring at him like he could turn water into wine. Here was a man who was 20 years his senior with connections to far more powerful people than Izuku could imagine and who made 10 times his annual salary and had the look of one who worked hard to earn what he had. This man was smiling at him like he was a golden goose, so logic would dictate that he likely wasn't about to be canned. But his manager was sweating buckets. Frankly, Izuku couldn't blame the man. Said manager had introduced him to the president the moment he shut the door behind him, and this greater person who Izuku could never match in wealth grabbed his hand and shook it like he was actually somebody worth noticing. Midoriya, it's a pleasure to meet you at last. Mr. D'Amico has said nothing but praise about your work ethic, and your yearly reviews have been spectacular for the entirety of your time with us. So it's no wonder such a wonderful client had selected you for this listing. Truth be told, I'm a little jealous that you were so lucky, but regardless, if you'll follow me I'll explain everything on the way. And quat. Izuku paused as his head whirled from the whiplash of whatever the hell just happened. He was still sleepy from this morning and not even an hour had passed. Instantly he looked behind the president to his manager for some kind of help or to explain what was going on, but D'Amico only gave a sympathetic glance before burying himself in progress records. Left with no choice, the quirkless man followed his better to the elevator on the other end of the entrance hallway of the floor while his co-workers looked on with concern and curiosity. He made eye contact with Tenzin, and Izuku felt a little better when the redhead gave him a thumbs up and a nod. Once inside the elevator with the man who had the power to not only ruin his life, but the lives of everyone he worked with for the past 2 years, Izuku stared at his feet to avoid offending such a powerful man. The president was, however, far more childlike in his expression, with a slight grin on his face that bordered on goofy. The man was humming some old theme song that Izuku swore he knew from somewhere and eventually couldn't take it anymore and spoke in as polite a tone as possible. Pardon me, sir, but if you can excuse my rudeness, might I ask who I will be working for? If I recall correctly, only those with a decade of experience can be selected for personal assignments with clients. And quat. The president grinned at him like one eager to tell a secret, but soon regained his professionalism to perhaps return the courtesy. That would usually be correct, but in this case a client has paid the maximum amount to have his finances balanced and he requested you by name, so to meet his request you have been brought on board. And quat. Izuku swallowed as a wave of nausea hit him. He held the gaze of the president and allowed his emotions to show for once. Sir, I only have 2-3 years of experience and have only worked with the oversight of a team. Frankly speaking, while I am incredibly honored to represent the company in this endeavor, I worry that I am not qualified for the task and I fear that my failings would ruin the company's reputation. And quat. A hand was placed on his shoulder in a fatherly manner and the older executive dropped the mask he wore. Son, don't you worry about that. We all make mistakes, that's what liability insurance is for. Besides, this will be looked over by our more senior staff upon completion, so you have nothing to worry about. For now just enjoy meeting. I'd rather not spoil the surprise. And quat. Izuku winced in pain as the still raw bite mark throbbed under the pad, but he hid it as the elevator continued to go up. His attention was drawn away from the pain when noticed how they were approaching the 400th floor. That was the private office of the CEO himself. What was a grunt like him doing being led to such a lofty place? Soon they arrived at the top floor and exited out to a massive area that may as well have been another world compared to his usual workspace with how goddamned opulent it was. Following the president, he was led down a corridor lined with oak wood paneling on the walls and red carpet on the floor that ended in 2 masterfully carved doors. The president stopped for a moment and gestured for him to go one ahead, but stopped him right as he started to move towards the door. The man leaned into his ear and sounded far younger than he had any right to be and whispered with the eagerness of a teenager. Can you please try and get an autograph as a personal favor? I'll make sure to throw a few favors your way. And quat. With that the senior left Izuku to blink in confusion and face the most powerful man in the company by himself. Pushing the door open he heard the sound of good-hearted laughter that instantly turned his blood to ice. The voice was deep and wiry that had a punch to it which could easily command respect. It was the same voice that haunted his nightmares. So then I had the slime ball in an armbar and his buddies backed up, but I and quat. Katsuki Bakugo ceased his story right as the door opened and his hellish red eyes gazed right into the emerald green of Izuku's soul. The bastard who ruined his life and nearly made him take his own life thrice had the audacity to grin at his arrival. It might have been seen as warm by those who didn't know what monster laid under that face. To Izuku he may as well have been seen by the devil. The CEO sat behind his desk in awe of the tormentor, none the wiser about what he was talking to. Katsuki stepped forward with a smile on his face that made a chill go down Izuku's spine, so much so that had to stop himself from stepping back towards the exit. Sweat gathered under Izuku's suit the closer this monster came. Slowly, carefully he drifted his hand to his right-hand pocket and felt the weight of the knife comfort him as lifelong fear and anger surged. Maybe he could stab him in the neck? No, he's too fast for that and there wouldn't be a place to run to if it went wrong. Should he flee? There were videos of this exploding asshole stopping dedicated speedsters going at 9 miles an hour. Perhaps he could lean in close and slice him across the eyes? His reflexes were too good. His heart hammered in his chest once Katsuki got in arm's reach of him, and all Izuku could do behind his emotionless mask was wish with all his might that Himiko was here to help him. Arms wrapped around his torso and pulled him close while one of them patted his back. Katsuki kept his grin up and let his old punching bag go, looking like nothing had changed at all about him. Hey Deku, it's been a while. Didn't see ya at Sugarman's shack, but small shit and all that. Anyway, how've you been? Tried talking to you back at the bar but you must have been too drunk to notice at the time. Again, shit happens. And quat. Izuku blinked as he stared right into the gates of hell, which were those red eyes. The knife brushed against the very tips of his fingers that entered the pocket. He could die right now. One wrong move and his entire life would end right here and now in this room. His intentions can't show otherwise. He'd be blown into bloody bits, just like Himiko's old friends. Suppressing his fear while picturing the girl he loved holding his hand, Izuku returned the smile like he learned to do with his mother. The knife grew heavier by the second. Oh, nothing much, Kachan. It's been the same old stuff since high school. And quat. He rubbed the back of his head to imitate embarrassment. Sorry if I didn't say anything at the bar. Honestly, I had taken one too many shots and needed to get home before I threw up. And quat. Katsuki laughed and slapped him on the shoulder like they were the oldest of brothers. Ah, ain't anything to it. Everybody's been there. And quat. Izuku nodded while keeping his manufactured smile on tight. His line of sight went behind Bakugo to the CEO, and to his disgust, the man looked on in absolute envy and with more respect than anyone had given the quirkless man. Taking his eyes back to the number one hero, Izuku cleared his throat to hopefully learn something of use. So Kachan, I hear you have some financial work in need of processing. And quat. The hero laughed and opened his mouth to answer, only to pause and look back at the CEO. Hey, is it a problem if I take him off the job site for the day since the paperwork is in one of my buildings? And quat. The man in charge of the company that allowed Izuku to eat and live in his shitty one-bedroom apartment. The man who is likely so ungodly wealthy that he likely could buy islands on a whim, glowed in gratitude from this bastard speaking to him. Not at all, sir. Your deposit came through, so for the foreseeable future you may use our associate in whatever way allows him to complete the task to your liking. And quat. Katsuki nodded and gestured to the door. Come on Deku, we got shit to do. And quat. Okay, scratch that. Maybe he should turn around and gut the rich fucker instead. Keeping his anger concealed, Izuku followed after Katsuki with that same plastic smile he wore for years. They left the high-rise office and were soon stuffed into the elevator with only the two of them while everyone looked on in awe of the monster. With a ding, the lift doors shut and it began its descent downwards, causing Katsuki to stretch once they were out of public sight. His cartilage snapped and popped as the masterfully honed musculature bent and flexed under his jacket, causing Izuku to nearly flinch as memory atop memories came back where he'd be burned after those sounds ended. Just keep the smile on and you'll be fine. And quat. Izuku repeated to himself again and again mentally, with the knife in his pocket giving some modicum of reassurance as he kept the tip of a finger on the end of the handle. His eyes were locked on the threat, just like Himiko taught him, with his back to the exit for a quick escape if need be. The enemy had a quirk that replicated the effects of high ordnance explosives from the palm of his hands, along with a refined physicality that was worked to a razor's edge, meaning a direct confrontation was the least survivable option. Perhaps he could lean in, drop down and stab into his femoral artery? It was unexpected and there wasn't anywhere to get out of grappling range, but what about the aftermath? By and large the world was on the enemy's side, and if he was found dead at the hands of a quirkless, wannabe hero who had been bullied all his life, he'd end up in Tartarus most likely, and even if he ran there were still cameras surrounding them, so he would still lose. The best thing was to keep the camouflage on and try and deter conflict until either A, the arrival of a more favorable environment to fight came around, or B, vanishing without causing suspicion in the enemy became possible. Yet no threats had been made just yet, so it was best to play along until option B was viable. Red eyes locked onto the green, and with it came a relieved grin that Izuku listened to as he kept a finger on his knife. Katsuki sighed and shook his head like he had aged 60 years in seconds. How long has it been since we last talked, Deku? Had to be half a decade at least. Fucking hell, that was way longer than I planned. But with the war and all the shit that led up to it, there wasn't a lot of chances to really hang out, And quat. And another 10 years away from you would be too soon, you fucking bastard. Izuku thought to himself while smiling warmly at his tormentors. So what sort of accounting do you need exactly, Kachan? I'm not. The hero cut him off with a laugh. That was just some bullshit I made up so you could get out of work for a while. I paid the fee and already had the paperwork processed beforehand, so the company gets its share and you get a massive bonus. Really, I just wanted us to talk. Your mama told me you're having trouble with a girl, that she's biting you or some shit. So that explains how this cancer returned to his life. His own mother set the demon on him because he chose to disobey just one time. Words couldn't describe how much he wanted to scream at the woman, but he kept it in his blood and shrugged. I prefer not to discuss such things on company time. Katsuki raised an eyebrow like he had just spoken to a recording. What the fuck, dude? Be honest with me, is there something going on like that with you? Izuku kept smiling. That is none of anyone's concern at the moment. The hero growled and closed the distance in the blink of an eye, grabbing the quirkless office work by the collar as fire blazed in his eyes. The hell it isn't. This is the first time I've seen you since we were kids and I had to go save the world, and the entire cause for this is because you've gotten into some weird ass relationship. Deku, I want answers. You and Quat. He paused and released his hold on the other man's shirt. Breathing deeply, he took a few steps back and composed himself, never noticing the bead of sweat trailing on Izuku's cheek and how something shifted in the man's pocket. Katsuki held his breath for 10, maybe 20 seconds, and exhaled. He still looked pissed, but only the usual level of it. Fuck, that was out of line. Anyway, what did you feel like doing? The tabs on me, so ask away. And Quat. Teeth clenched in Izuku's jaw as more anger mounted. His heart was pounding in his chest and he had to hide his left hand behind his back to stop his hand balling into a fist in front of the bastard. Killing you or running away into the arms of the only girl to show me an ounce of affection since the war. And Quat. He thought to himself as he urged himself to keep the mask on. What do you have in mind, Kachan? And Quat. The blonde squinted his eyes at his oldest friend, seeming vaguely concerned. Are you alright? You're acting fucking creepy. And Quat. Izuku pursed his lips inside his smile and glanced up at the cameras. He sighed and put on another mask, one filled with his beaten down self. Gradually the smile fell and he stepped closer to the man who nearly made him kill himself thrice and leaned into his ear. I gotta keep acting this way or it's my ass. This job is my only source of income, and if I mess up then I'm screwed. And Quat. Sympathy rained on Katsuki's face as he saw just how beaten his lantern was. The sorrow on Izuku's face shifted back to the smile, which only made the hero worry more. Shaking his head, Katsuki pulled out his phone. I get it, Deku, I really do. Being in the rat race ain't fun, but what you gotta do is invest and try and get as many income streams as possible. Make a brand to market or just put 25% of your cash in stocks so that you can move on to real estate. That way you'll get out of this shit. Hell, thanks to that I never gotta worry about that stuff again. And Quat. He opened his bank account and showed the screen, and the amount shown in his primary checking account was over 11,306,500,000 yen, or the equivalent of $100 million. And that isn't a static amount either, since I get continual revenue from dividends and royalties from all over, so it'll never run dry. All you need to do is invest and make, and things will get better. And Quat. Izuku couldn't believe what he was seeing. How did this asshole get that fucking rich? He wouldn't earn even a % of that if he worked until he was dead. He had to live in an overpriced one-bedroom shack while Katsuki Bakugo got. His anger peeked over his mask, and for once in his life Izuku glared at the monster, letting a fraction of his anger show. With what fucking money? I only have 2,000 in my account and rent eats up half of that. Then food takes the other 20%. Then 20 more goes to utilities just so I can have heat and a shower. Then 5% goes into buying shit that lets me forget how shitty my life is, and the last 5 rest in my bank. So excuse me if I don't have the same resources as you, Mr. fucking World Savior, since I'm a normal fucking dude with no quirk. And Quat. Katsuki actually flinched at the ire and venom in his friend's voice, but instead of firing back with anger there was a surge of sympathy and pity on his face. Taking his gaze back to his phone, the hero began to punch in codes and passwords while Izuku slowly tightened his proverbial mask back on. There came a ping from the weaker man's device, and carefully he took out his phone. There was a notification on it, one from his bank, which said approximately 226,130,000 yen had been deposited into his account. That was the equivalent of $2 million. It took Izuku a minute to read the notification. Then he reread it, then once more, and suddenly felt his heart jump like he had been shot. Blinking as if he had seen his hand explode, Izuku looked up completely flabbergasted from his phone. Katsuki met his gaze and looked like a far more aged man with haunted eyes that lingered sorrowfully at the other man. I hope that helps, Deku. I owe you more than that for all you've done for me, but it's the best I can do at the moment. I'll sit down with you later to show you how to invest, but for now, let's just hang out like we used to, okay? And Quat. If ever Izuku had wanted to know what it felt like to be a whirlwind, he was fairly certain it was something like what was going on in his head. There were so many emotions blasting one after the other that it made his brain hurt. Anger, embarrassment, shame, a sliver of gratitude, indignation, fear, confusion, joy, relief, disbelief, suspicion and more all burned like a star as he looked at his old tormentor. Then two emotions won out over every other one, that being rage and guilt. How dare he assume he needed a handout? Did the fucker think it'd make up for every second of pain he inflicted that was felt even now? Was he able to just walk in, drop some cash and all is forgiven? That he had the balls to assume he was so high and mighty that simple paper would absolve him of his crimes? Fuck him and fuck his money. While at the same time a voice in the back of his head radiated the guilt of being given such a gift. That he was unworthy of such wealth and should be ashamed for needing it. His head lowered for a moment, then Izuku turned off the screen and glared at Katsuki. He closed the distance and grabbed the hero by the shirt. You fucking idiot, don't you need that money? Who in their right fucking mind just drops that much in a second ? And quat. Katsuki smiled at the concern in his friend's voice, it being the only actual thing he saw that was really what Izuku was feeling. It's alright Deku, that shit's chump change to me. Hell, I'll make that back twice in a month on top of what my actual paycheck is. You deserve better for what you did for me and I'd given you more if the government wouldn't get involved. I wasn't there for you when I should have been and I hope this'll help me start repaying you. And quat. Izuku bared his teeth and slammed him into the wall of the elevator. I gotta pay you back now, is that it? You gonna start demanding interest on it and make me your debt slave? What's the fucking catch ? And quat. The blonde bomber raised his arms up in surrender, glad he could get such a reaction out of his light. There's no catch dude. This isn't a loan. It's a repayment to the debt I owe you and it doesn't even begin to pay it back. And quat. Izuku couldn't believe this. His mind actually couldn't process the information so fast and in his fury brought the man to his face with spittle flying from his mouth. You goddamn son of a bitch. And quat. A ding from the elevator door stopped him mid-rant and before Katsuki could respond or the doors open, Izuku threw himself to the far end of the lift into that same plastic smile again as someone entered, never even hinting at the emotion or fury of the previous second as a third occupant came in. He looked for all the world like everything was fine and that disturbed Katsuki. How in the fuck was Deku, hell, anyone able to do that where they can just switch off their emotions and mask them on such a dime? Even villains had trouble with that kind of thing to such a rapid degree. What the fuck happened while he was away fighting the PLA all those years ago? The ride ended right as the third occupant's floor came up and it so happened to be the ground level so the pair exited the building. The moment he passed through those gates Izuku's expression changed back to one of utter exhaustion which he cast at his current tag-along. Are you sure you don't need the money? And quat. Katsuki socked him lightly in the arm and grinned. Shut up, I already said it was fine so stop asking. It's my money to use as I please and I wanted to do you a favor, there isn't any mystery to it. Now follow me and hop in, we're getting pizza. And quat. He took out a key fob, pressed the unlock icon and on the far end of the parking lot in front of a building a cherry red 2188 Corvette flashed its light. It was literally the nicest vehicle Izuku had ever seen and for some reason he felt truly jealous of Katsuki when he saw those doors open vertically and they both entered. The interior seating was decked in dark red leather with the console being made in a retro wooden style that beamed to life once the sensors detected their entry. Katsuki put his thumb to a print reader set where the ignition would be in a far older vehicle and with a soundless roar the electric engine kicked on. They exited the parking lot and turned into the street, making Izuku feel claustrophobic in the tiny coupe. Katsuki cast a glance towards him for a split second before directing his eyes back to the road. So aside from work and money, how's life been recently? Tell me a bit about this chick cause I get the feeling Annie was blowing shit out of proportion like usual. And quat. Taking his hand away from the knife and letting himself decompress in the seat, Izuku looked out the window to maybe give some mental space to process things. What did she tell you exactly? And quat. The gearbox shifted soundlessly as the vehicle picked up speed going from one gear to another while Katsuki passively looked ahead. That you were fucking some crazy bitch who has a blood quirk and likes making you bleed or some such weirdness. Also said that this bitch had you call her mommy in front of Annie before you ran away from your own house. Needless to say, I'm assuming most of that's bullshit. And quat. A heavy blush came over Izuku at the mention of the night he almost lost his virginity and he remained silent as a growing tension grew by the second. Katsuki noticed this and raised an eyebrow while driving. It is bullshit, right? And quat. The quirkless man pursed his lips and laughed awkwardly, wishing he could jump out of the car right now. So there may be an element of truth to that. And quat. Katsuki didn't respond immediately, instead allowing the information to be processed by his mind as his voice came out even and steady. This was despite the fact there was a slight squeak from the steering wheel due to how his hands tightened around it. How much of that was true? And quat. Izuku shrugged again, his hand now inching towards the door handle. All of it. And quat. They arrived at a stoplight and sat there for a brief minute before turning right. Katsuki inhaled deeply and exhaled in an attempt to calm himself right as they pulled into a chain pizza store and parked. His fingers tapped against the wheel and undoing his seatbelt, turned his complete attention to his friend. Deku, explain to me how you of all people got into a situation where something that fucked up could happen. The green hair worker shrugged once more as sweat started to gather under his sleeves. Well, I met her on a bridge one night when I was on a walk. We got to talking and after a couple months we went steady. But as to how that scene happened with my mom, I invited my girl over because otherwise I'd be married off to some woman I don't even know. My mom started getting pissy and asked her a bunch of sensitive questions, so she left and took me with her. Katsuki kept his gaze fixed on the less powerful man. That didn't explain why you called her what you did in front of your own goddamn mother. Izuku winced at the cold harshness to the barb and nearly averted his eyes if it weren't for hours of painful training. Shrugging once more, he moved closer to the door. She just likes it when I call her that, so I did. In fact, she refused to come unless I started calling her that. Bafflement bloomed on the hero's face as he followed up the question. Wait, so does that mean you call her that when you two and quat? He cringed at the thought and shivered. Never fucking mind, I don't wanna know. What I do wanna know is why the fuck you're doing this shit. I mean, you expect me to believe that some crazy bitch is the best chance you have at getting laid? And quat. Izuku chewed on his lip as he pulled out his phone to scroll to a picture he hadn't opened in years. Ever since my high school days were over, pretty much. There was this one girl I was close to, but nothing big really happened and we drifted apart after the calamity. And quat. Katsuki peeked over at the screen and saw a far younger Deku in a white tracksuit standing next to a taller mutant of a raven-haired woman with blue eyes who had red scales in place of baseline skin. The both of them appeared sweaty with bronze and silver medals around their necks. They smiled, clearly still in a runner's high, while the woman had her arm around Deku's neck and he had one around her waist. He dragged his eyes to Izuku, and whatever that photo meant, it was clearly something to the guy since he began to stare at it, clearly getting lost in old memories. There was a shaky inhale from Izuku as he visibly had to stop himself from getting too caught up in whatever he was feeling and open the door after putting his phone away. His voice broke for a brief second when he spoke. See, come on, let's go get some fucking food. And quat. Watching him go on ahead, Katsuki made a mental note to ask somebody who the hell that dragon half-breed looking chick was, because there was clearly something he was missing here. Grabbing a black face mask, sunglasses and a ball cap, the pro examined his face in the mirror. Good enough that nobody should spot him unless they had an extrasensory quirk. Sighing at himself, he exited the vehicle, locked it and made his way to the entrance where Deku was still waiting for him. A smile crawled over the hero when he made eye contact with his friend. It was good to see his oldest friend was still the same loyal, loving comrade who would stay by his side. However, there was still a sadness in Izuku's eyes. It showed on his body and his very face as he began to stare at the ground, seeming to not be in the current moment. The green-haired man balled his fists and Katsuki could see the steps of tears in his eyes, yet to Deku's credit he wiped away the moisture and got a grip. Though his expression appeared far more haggard, like reliving whatever that picture summit had been worse enough to bring him low. They looked at each other and Deku, for once in his life, was silent. Not a word said other than to order his food when they entered. Katsuki raised an eyebrow at this, but didn't push it. He of all people knows what it's like to be trapped in painful memories. Thus the two sat at their table like statues, neither saying a word to each other until the pro hero broke the silence. So how'd you end up working for Bakerman? And quat. Izuku cast his eyes up and shrugged, glad to have something to distract him. I found out about his ad in the paper, gave him a call, showed I knew how to do paperwork, and I got hired. Sato's a great guy to work for, but most of the time it's mainly desk work. And quat. Katsuki let out a breath of relief and leaned back in his chair. Well, everyone needs that shit done. Hell, I gotta fill out 20 forms daily just to keep being able to use my quirk like I have. Honestly, desk work is more important than muscle work in the industry, since that stuff leads to convictions in court and keeps the public even with the force. And quat. Izuku stared at the man who burned him alive before and decided to just say fuck it and ask a million questions. At least it'll help him bury the memory of that night and give him insight into his abuser and the hero field. So what do you even do all day, Kachan? There's almost no coverage of any of your work after Victory Day, and I can't see you walking a beat when you have that kind of reputation. And quat. The blonde shrugged right as a server left 2 plates filled with pizza. Most days I just patrol like everyone else, but I don't step in unless things get truly fucked. I can do any amount of rescue work I please, but after my little outburst 2 years ago I've been barred from combat unless the commission gives the okay. And quat. Izuku paused when he heard that. So you're basically a weapon? And quat. He nodded. Pretty much. I don't get to be in the limelight or get crowds of folks abasing me in praise, and I don't want to. The people need symbols to inspire and give them a good example to live up to, like All Might was for us. I'm not that. All I'm good at is pointing my palm at something and blowing it up. Anything else and I fuck it up. I'm the guy people call when shit gets deadly and they need a massive show of force. And quat. Izuku kept his eyebrows raised despite the fact he began to nibble on his slice. But what if you get too old or injured? Who takes your place then? Inquat. Katsuki shrugged, his mask strapped over the bottom of his chin and a piece in his hand. Ever since the mass use of rewind shots became a thing, I could technically keep working forever, hell everyone could. But for regulatory reasons I'd need to retire by the time I'm 45 so some new blood can come in. Can't really explain who or why due to legal reasons, but there's contingencies in place. Inquat. The hero popped the knuckles of his free hand and stared at the other man. What about you? What the hell kept you occupied till now aside from work? Inquat. Izuku pursed his lips at that. How should he answer that? Should he answer that? Did Katsuki even deserve an answer? What was the harm? Better to just feed the bastard some information so he'll get off his case. I usually just head to my girl's place. She lets spend the night and we do things. Sparring, talking, that kind of bullshit. Inquat. Katsuki shook his head. So you mean to tell me that all you've been doing for the past 5 months is banging this bitch? Don't you have a hobby or something? Inquat. A little pride beamed in Izuku at the assumption. Yep, that's all I do and I can't imagine a better way to spend my time. She's my darling after all. Inquat. Sympathy glowed behind those shades as Katsuki set his finished plate to the side. That's not healthy. Believe me, I've been there where I made my girl the center of my world and made banging her until she passed out my personal mission in life. You'll start neglecting yourself and what you need mentally as you get more dependent on that girl for everything emotional. Then before long it'll start draining on you both spiritually and then you'll end up in a very bad place. Inquat. The hero sucked in air through his teeth at his own memories. What I'm trying to say is that you need hobbies and goals and aspects of your life that don't revolve around your partner. You can include them, hell you should in some cases, but you still need to be yourself. Otherwise it'll morph into something very unpleasant. Inquat. Izuku found the sensation radiating off his bully to be unreasonably concerning with how foreboding he sounded. It only grew worse when he remembered that the woman Katsuki was so devoted to at one point, may have propositioned him for sex. Now Izuku hates the man. Perhaps enough to want him dead, but even he had to admit hearing something like that was so soul-shattering that not even Kachan deserved something that horrible. Yet a curious part of his mind egged him on to ask another question which he needed to lean forward to whisper. Kachan, I gotta ask, have you and your lady ever done bondage before? Inquat. The blonde recoiled violently at the question, smacking his head on the headboard of the chair. Yet his expression changed from anger to embarrassment as he lowered his voice. A few times. She wanted to try something from one of those shitty romance novels she kept getting in the mail, so I ended up getting strapped to my bed frame while we did the deed. Won't say I'm proud of it, but it's just the shit you come up with after years together. Inquat. Izuku paused and leaned in again, whispering in a genuine hope that maybe he found someone to vent out his worries about the more unconventional side of his relationship. Did you guys ever do anything rougher? Like letting her bite you until you start to bleed or beat you in the gut until you start to throw up or anything like that? Inquat. Disgust ruled over Katsuki's jaw as he stared at his friend. No, it never got more than her handcuffing me every so often. Why would you allow that kind of stuff? I mean, yeah, you might have no fucking spine, but come on dude. You have to have a little self-respect. Inquat. A blush came over Izuku despite himself as his fingers tapped against the table. She just likes it like that and I won't deny her my body, so ... Inquat. Katsuki bared his teeth and growled. That is the most sorry, pathetic. Inquat. A ringtone interrupted from his pocket as an All Might themed tune declared a phone call is here 3 times over while Katsuki brought the device to his ear. He grumbled into it, the ire growing by the second as he listened to whoever was on the other end. Yet, instead of giving an outburst he finished the call and exhaled. Sorry Deku, but I'm needed somewhere. You mind just handling yourself until I get back? It'll be a couple hours and I can maybe drop you off somewhere. Inquat. Izuku shot up from his chair like a rocket at the prospect of finally being free of this bastard. I can take care of myself from here. Kachan. You just go on ahead and take care of business. I'll just head home. Inquat. Katsuki glared at him judgmentally like some disapproving teacher. No yelling came nor a slap on the arm or even a little boom from his palm. Instead the man who once told him to end his life wrapped his arms around him for 5 earth-stopping seconds. Then with a slight tap, a piece of paper was put on the table. On it was a phone number. I'll give you a call later on and, it's been good seeing you again Deku. Inquat. Without another word the man who saved the world left to go mete out justice to whoever was foolish enough to arouse his ire. Izuku was alone now in the restraint and the moment that door shut behind Kachan he let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. With all the events that just occurred in less than a 2-hour period there wasn't an ounce of energy in him that was able to process everything. The only thing he could think of was to return to his apartment as sort of a primitive instinct for safety. So he left and boarded the 11 a.m. train, content to just passively stare out numbly until he arrived home. Once there he undid the locks, walked in, locked the door and took approximately 15 steps to his sofa before collapsing onto it. Then he began to break down the events of the day as best he could. One hand drifted to his phone and pulled up his bank account. He stared at the numbers for minutes, still not sure everything that happened was real. But it was. Kachan had arrived at his work, paid his entire company so that he could supposedly do some bookkeeping privately when it was a lie to get them to talk, gave him the equivalent of $2 million American dollars because he had helped the sob through some way Izuku couldn't guess at, and proceeded to grill into his love life. All because his mother had asked Katsuki to pay him a visit. How in the fuck was this what his life turned into? Briefly he closed his eyes and breathed. There were very few times in his life where he was happy or without problems that couldn't be dealt with. However, it still bothered him. He hated that he was powerless, that he needed power in the first place. Why wasn't he allowed to simply be and not be tormented? Why couldn't things be like how they were in high school? His eyes opened at the thought and he moved from his living room to his bedroom. The light flipped on, allowing him to open his nightstand and take out the album. His fingers flipped through the pages, showing half-remembered faces and forgotten souls before it landed on the section for the track team. Slowly Izuku raised his index finger away, fearful of the old emotions he knew would follow, but he did it anyway. He was met by the younger faces of some of the only sort of friends he had in his youth, and kneeling beside him with her arm around his neck was the one person he would not, ever forget. Years of pain rose as he turned the 3 pages to the one that haunted him. It was the happiest moment of his life at the time, and the night that followed after they won that race together was one he still hated himself for. Maybe if he was more courageous, more forward, more honest with himself and less afraid of failure, less filled with self-loathing and doubt. Maybe if he had put his foot down on himself and allowed his soul to be happy for once and done more than just kiss her the night before the world went mad. If he had said yes, I do. Then perhaps everything would be different. He'd be married now and have a better life, if only he hadn't hesitated that night. Though he also took solace in knowing Aki survived the madness at least. The laminate over the pictures had begun to smudge for a reason Izuku knew the moment his breathing hitched. He was crying. He wiped away the tears on the pages with his shirt, put the book away and fought to not break down. The past was done. Aki was gone with her own life to live, so he had no business poking his nose into it after all this time, and the only thing he had now was the future and the present. He had a hero job now, he had friends now, and above all else he had Himiko now. That was reason enough to smile, but despite it, Izuku still took one last gaze at the book as the thought of what could have been whispered in his ear. Shaking his head, the quirkless man changed out of his work uniform and put the dirty set to the side. Quickly he grabbed a duffel bag and stuffed it with sets of clothes and other necessities that filled it perfectly. Dialing his manager, Izuku requested an unpaid week off due to a personal reason, which was given without too much fuss. With that done, he dialed up Himiko and waited for her voice to come through the speaker. Hey Greenie, what's up? Aren't you supposed to be at work? And quat. The mere presence of her sound made him feel far more at ease, enough that he even smiled. Don't worry, I took a week off, but do you mind if I ask a tiny favor? And quat. A snarky hint came into her voice. If it's about my butt again, I'm gonna be pissed. And quat. He laughed. No, nothing like, okay, maybe later on, but I was wondering if you wouldn't mind if I crashed at your place for a week? If that's too much, I understand. And quat. There was a high pitch to her tone now, as if she was trying to hold in her excitement. Sure, that's no problem at all. Just come over whenever and I'll order takeout. And quat. He was already halfway to the door by then. Don't worry about it, I'll handle the food. You just focus on relaxing. And quat. Himiko was giggling like a schoolgirl now. Okay mister, I can do that. How about I spoil you a bit tonight? You know, get it out of our systems to start with. And quat. The smile faded from Izuku's face when those old memories from before everything came back. He could still see those blue eyes staring at him with a faith that he never had in himself on that couch as he laid there in those strong, thin arms. That was a lifetime ago and you blew your chance, get over it. And quat. His inner voice said to him as his heart started to hurt. Sighing at his own stupidity, Izuku focused on the happiness he had now and allowed himself an honest smile. How about I spoil you tonight instead? I'm down for a little rough stuff if you want. And quat. The former villainous laughed like she won the lottery. Fine by me. I just want you to know I'll be waiting, and when you get here, let's just say I have an idea in mind. One that you're gonna love. And quat. Izuku grinned as he undid the locks to his front door. I'll take your word on it. If I don't, then I want a little payback. And quat. Himiko laughed again as the sound of her bare feet hitting on the floorboards of her shitty apartment echoed through the speaker. We'll see Zuzu. And quat. The call ended and Izuku began his trip to see his lover, glad to simply relax for the little bit of time he had to spend. Though as he entered the train he kept thinking back to his life and how much it has changed and how much power the past still held over him. It worried him, but those were dispelled when he pictured the possibility of good things happening. After all, what else could throw his life into more disorder at this point? Himiko wasn't sure what she expected when Izuku arrived at her front door, but at the very least he was acting kind of normal with how he was holding her with a hand around one of her tits. Though there was clearly something up with him and he wasn't cracking. To be fair, she wasn't trying either. He didn't look as bad as when he admitted to nearly going out and murdering people to vent his rage, but he was clearly troubled. His face just looked too heavy and his touch just a little too rough. It made her want to ask, but on the other hand he was holding her. The pros outweigh the cons here, so Himiko leaned back in his arms and let him have his way. She winced a little when he moved an arm around her belly and squeezed her to him. He had been getting stronger, and by God did it show. Muscles rippled out from his skinny frame and the mass of his biceps was pinching into her side. Personally, she hoped he wouldn't get into bodybuilding because the idea of seeing him that muscled was just gross. It would be like trying to screw an island. He would be better off lean and strong, just enough to where he could pick her up. Regardless, Himiko looked up at him, seeing how distant his eyes were before he came back to reality with a sigh and kissed her forehead. He stared at her for a minute with a wave of relief following over and proceeded to move both his arms around her tummy and fall to his side on the sofa. She was mildly perturbed, but if he wanted to lay down with her then okay. He was just a big old baby after all. In a way she was happy to have him around again. It was so lonely waiting for him, and now he was here again. It was the little things she missed, the way he held her and let her know she wasn't without. It was so good to just be touched again. In fact, gently Himiko wiggled her fingers under his arms and pushed outwards, eliciting a grunt of protest from Izuku as she got up. Quickly she turned to her bedroom and came out with her comforter in hand. The girl stood there for a moment before she threw the blanket at the sofa and removed her shirt along with her bra. Predictably she had Izuku's full attention, and despite this Himiko still felt a little bashful for asking something so petty. "Could you take your shirt off?" Quat. Shrugging, the man did as asked and removed his garment, revealing the host of black burned scars on his torso. Himiko studied the marks and felt a twang of regret. He looked so much like Dabi that it hurt to see him like that. Soon came a flood of guilt at how she rather liked the way Izuku's scars looked. Mentally shaking the thoughts away, she approached and made her way under the blanket. She shivered a bit when her back touched his chest. It was rough and warm and just squishy enough to be comfortable. She smiled as he put an arm around her and snuggled closer, digging his lips into the nape of her neck while they languished in the warmth of their bodies. The TV was playing some other cheesy show that she had put on to pad out the silence, but Himiko couldn't help it when a giggle escaped her. At least he was paying attention to her again. His hands traveled up her torso again, but instead of aiming for her breasts like she thought, Himiko flinched when he slotted his fingers under her armpits. He laughed like a goddamn villain and rolled his tongue against the rim of her ear, making her wince a little. "Say Uncle Quat." She turned her head to face him with a deadpan expression. "Don't you dare, Mr. Quat." He grinned. "I dare, and you're gonna laugh, Quat." At once his fingers began to squirm and move as they dug into her armpits. She wasn't used to this sort of torture. It wasn't like they were criminals who tickled their enemies, so at once the former villainess began to laugh like a banshee. She tried to move, but every time she tried, Izuku would angle himself to keep her in place. He had the expression of one in utter bliss as she kept laughing, and soon he began to attack other spots. The side of her neck, the top of her belly, anywhere he thought would make her laugh. Himiko was turning red in the face now, but with her arms now free her old muscle memory kicked in. Pulling herself forward, she grabbed the crook of one of his legs and shot her palm under his chin. Using the momentum of her movement and his weight, she managed to land him on the other side of the sofa with a crash as he laid on his back. She was on top of him, fighting to get control as he flared about on instinct. Suddenly he stopped when she pressed her forearm against his throat, causing her to smile triumphantly with a slight buzz burning in her head at his shocked expression. Air flooded partly into her lungs as she caught her breath while still giggling here and there. "Looks like you lost, Izu and Quat." She paused when his expression changed. It wasn't the disbelief of one who lost, nor the fear of one expecting pain or the silent glow of one hoping for pleasure. What she saw on his face was guilt. A basic, childish guilt born out of someone who believed they misbehaved. He cast his gaze to the floor and pursed his lips apologetically, but Himiko merely smiled warmly. Her hands caressed his cheeks and waited until some of the guilt faded from him to speak. "Ah, don't worry, Zuzu, you didn't do anything wrong. I was just playing too rough. And Quat." Slowly his hands reached out to grab her torso with a twinkle of fear, one not of physical pain, but of rejection, that she might spurn his touch for once. She reached out to his hesitating arm and put on her side, smiling as kindly as she could with canines that could and had tear out a throat with ease. Izuku studied her for a moment, his eyes still filled with that childlike fear of rebuke. Then he exhaled and wrapped both his arms around her. "So I wasn't taking without asking?" And Quat. Her lips curled at that. If she had ever wanted to hear anything at all in her life, it was this. Knuckles caressed his cheek and Himiko saw how his face tensed with expectation of something unpleasant. Yet instead of a slap or a punch, her fingers simply ran through his hair while Himiko looked him in the eye. "Oh baby, you were just being silly and I acted like a dummy. There's nothing wrong with what you did." And Quat. Relaxation came over him as a tide after hearing her, yet his expression suddenly turned straight-laced and stone-like. Green eyes stared into her, and with a soft shift in his posture they were both upright. He put an arm around her possessively while the blanket covered the both of them and glanced at the clock, then back at her. Himiko, I love you and I don't mind getting physical, but is there anything you want to do today that isn't whatever the hell we do to each other ? And quat. The slasher thought on it and shrugged, collapsing herself on top of him. Maybe, for now I kinda just wanna squish you. In fact, and quat. She pointed a finger to the doorway of her room. Carry me to the bed and get naked. And quat. A groan left the man as he heard her. Darling, I'm not against getting our rocks off, but I'm gonna be here for a week. There has to be something more we can do to fill the time. And quat. Himiko snagged the side of his cheek and twisted it in a pinch. Sounds to me like you're being naughty. When I ask you to do something I expect it done. Now pick me up and carry me to the bed like usual. I wanna nibble on you for a while. And quat. His eyes became sharper and less tolerant as what was once a tender moment transformed into a glaring stare down. It wasn't one that even hinted at something dangerous. It was more akin to a simple domestic dispute. Eventually Izuku broke his line of sight and pulled the woman closer. The ire was still there in both of them, but at least it lessened as he tried to keep softer intimacy. Pausing for a moment, he considered things they could do together that weren't entirely that. Then an idea came to him. Will you cook dinner with me at least ? And quat. Himiko pouted a bit, but lessened her edge, instead electing to stare at him like a teenager who hasn't gotten their way. Alright, fine, but first we make each other feel good. And quat. He eyed her suspiciously. Is there ever anything else on your mind ? And quat. She shifted herself over him to where she was now sitting on his lap and put her head on her knees. Not when it comes to you. I've been waiting all day for you to get back, so act like a good boy and carry me. And quat. An eye roll answered her, but his strong arms did lift up from beneath her as he supported the upper part of her back and the bridge of her legs. A smile found its way to Himiko as she began to lightly kick her legs. This continued when Izuku walked through the open bedroom door and proceeded to set her down on the oversized mattress. There was an element of awkwardness to himself when she started to move, spreading herself flat before him on her back. He didn't make eye contact, perhaps as a way of protest, though that ended when she snapped her fingers. He flinched at the sound and instantly his focus was on her completely. A smirk came over Himiko as she inched herself closer, crawling on all fours to the edge of the mattress and beckoning with her index finger. Then she stopped and let her smirk grow when she got off the bed. A finger was inside his belt line and then she began inserting 3 more. They glided along the rim of his waist before stopping at his buckle and taking her hands around the strap. Himiko loosened it, then the button on his pants, undid his fly and brought it down to his ankles. He raised a foot to get it off his leg, making Himiko giggle as she helped him with the deed. Once those were taken care of, she set them to the side and took notice of his boxers, more specifically the thing poking out of his boxers. A smile came over her when she saw that, dragging a finger over its length, and watched how his body tensed and there was a slight hitch to his breathing at the anticipation. Her golden eyes drifted up and glowed at the glee she felt watching him get so excited. She could see it in his eyes just how much he was hanging on to her every action, waiting and hoping for a pleasure only she could give. Looks like I wasn't the only one who was lonely while you were away, Zuzu. How much did you miss me ? And quat. A shiver came over him as his boxers soon followed his pants and his heart began to pound. His hands twitched and slowly he edged his grasp to the side of her head while those cat-like eyes stared almost mockingly at him. They spoke of an inherent superiority and an almost self-assured leverage, though he knew she wasn't wrong at the moment and he was too on fire to care. All he wanted right now was to touch her. More than you can believe. And quat. There was an undeniable, primal honesty in his voice and she knew right down to her core he was bearing his soul. Standing up from her kneeling position, Himiko ran her finger down his cheek again and waited for a few long seconds just to make him more eager. Taking a few steps backward, she removed her pants and threw them to the floor along with panties. His eyes popped at seeing her utterly bare, and with it came even more frustration that Himiko could almost taste in the air. Her hand reached out to him, taking him by the arm as she crawled back on the bed, making the spring squeak in protest under combined body weight. He slid a hand over the top of her belly, working his way down to her crotch with a stupid single-mindedness only to be stopped by a hand gripping his wrist. Himiko waved a taunting finger at him and eased him down flat on the sheets. New one Zuzu, you don't get that just yet. If you want to feel good then you gotta be patient. Just lay down and let me have my way for a while. And quat. There was a spark of mild resentment in his eyes at her demand, but he relented and laid on his back. The blonde felt her cheeks turn rosy as she looked at her lover. Slim yet muscular, tall yet not giant, and covered in scars aplenty that made the sicker parts of her bark, while he stared at her with a respectful fear and a deep, undeniable desire. It was all for her. Nobody else could touch him. Nobody else wanted to touch him. This man was only for her pleasure, for her delight, and he knew that. Izuku knew what she was, what she felt and what she liked. He knew this and still wanted her. The proof was quite literally standing at attention a few feet from her face. He loved her, more than anyone had before, at least in this way, and it made her heart throb. Casting a hand along his chest, Himiko felt her teeth start to itch and her muscles tense. Instantly images of him bleeding entered her mind, those nice little drops of sanguine all covering his beautiful, fucked up skin. He wouldn't scream, not her Zuzu. Oh, he'd dislike it, maybe give a grunt or yelp in protest, but he'd willingly give himself to her. All the disturbed visions she had he'd accept, and by God did she want it, want him. Himiko could picture him that bruised, bloody and messed up, while all the while doing his damn to finish as she played with that amazing body. She could ask, demand and get. She could take out a knife and slice into his flesh and slurp up his blood, and he'd allow it if she brought it up gently. There was even a knife tucked away under the frame of the bed, so she could just do it now. After all, he didn't make that much of a fuss when she introduced him to biting. He even brushed off her drinking his blood, so cutting him wouldn't be too much trouble. She'd be upfront about it and explain in detail, let him set some ground rules, make sure to have extra first aid supplies on hand, and wrap the bed in plastic before making sure he shot out buckets to make up for the pain. Nice, sweet and simple, just like love should be. Yet, she knew the risks involved in that, didn't she? She knew exactly how to bleed a person in just the right way to keep them on the edge of living, and how to slice in just the right spot to have them pass in seconds. Not that she wanted him dead, but she had slipped up before in her past, and then there was herself. She enjoyed seeing people bleed, seeing the fear in their eyes as their life slipped away drop by drop, and knowing she was the only one who could prevent that. But, she had hated those people. Those fuckers who had played with her innocent heart. Zuzu was special to her now. He was her treasure. A ruby in the rust that gleamed like a goddamn sun to her, even if it was a dulled and broken gem that only she could find value in. A gem that held the ransom of a king, which had been cracked and chipped by the eroding pain of time and misused by others to the point no one else wanted it. She was all he had, and she knew it. Those E-list heroes only saw him as a paperworker at best, and that one pink bitch only saw the facade Izuku wore and would doubtlessly cast him away if he showed her what Himiko had seen. His cunt of a mother didn't even see him as he really was. Hell, if anything, she was worse than her own parents, because at least they were honest about how they wanted her to just be a display piece for their family name. Inko was the same, except she tried to tell herself it was for his own good instead of admitting her hatred of her son. Everyone in this whole damn world never saw her Zuzu. They never loved him or cared about him. Bakugo, may he rot in hell one day, even tormented him for years as children, and not a damn finger was raised. If she left, then he'd be alone and used. At the same time, he was all she had. The League was dead. Chiki barely talked to her due to her job of saving lives, and every person she tried to court was worse than her. Then there was the fact that every time she let someone into her life, it ran the risk of them finding out her past and deciding to let the world know the last member of the dreaded vanguard was alive and kill her for revenge in the name of the millions that died. They were both lost and with no one to ever enter their lives, since they were the sludge of society. All they had was each other, and she was fine with that. She had gotten her rebellion and got to live the way she wanted, and she learned it sucked. None of it made her happy in a lasting way, and if anything, it reinforced the message of how no matter how much you scream at the world to understand you and perhaps let you live with how you are, it doesn't give a fuck. If you lash out violently, then people, not just heroes or the police or the army, but everyone will want you gone. It doesn't matter if you were abused or hurt or crazy or in pain. Nobody gives a fuck if your life was nothing but silent suffering, because it boils down to one basic fact. The world doesn't owe anyone anything. She had gotten away with her life and her legal freedom, which was a miracle in itself. Now she had a friend, a lover even, who understood her. He accepted that she was once a killer and still desired her. That was practically a gift from above to her, so why ruin it? Why just use him as a proverbial rag for her bloody fantasies? She had a ruby in front of her, so it was her duty to refine it to better heights, bring her joy into him and let them share in the pleasure. Yet it was the waiting she loathed. Her soul screamed at her to bite, to cut, to love until the sheets were stained in his blood and she was tainted in his juices. She wanted to defile herself with his body, his very soul, so that she would never be alone again. She wanted him to come back endlessly and use her as badly as she wanted to use him until they were complete. An even deeper part of her wanted him to abuse her, to hit her the same way her parents did and let out everything he held in while she did the same. She liked seeing him enraged, perhaps not at her, but flowing with enough energy and power that he could easily put Tomura to shame with his fury. She adored it when he grabbed her by the face and said he would kill to keep her, that she was his only one, despite knowing in the back of her mind it was unhealthy. There was still a part of her that was that hurt, neglected little girl who had been cast aside, and the way he thought in those moments, the way he held her so close it threatened to rip her skin while saying exactly what she meant to him. It made that hurt little girl stop hurting just a bit. Sighing at her inner monologue as she continued to caress his body, Himiko made eye contact with him, and now he was waiting with bated breath which burned hot while he fought not to reach out. He certainly was eager, and she adored that about him, but it upset her about how she couldn't give herself completely to him. They had to wait for that, and it would be an agonizingly long wait. Then she studied his scars, old, ugly, charred things that even Dabi would flinch at. Himiko liked them. Sure, they could look 10 times better with some blood, but there was something about the markers that irked her. Bakugo had done this to him. That bastard had made a claim onto his skin before she could, and it made her begin to seethe silently while running her fingers through her Zuzu's hair. Izuku was obviously innocent in that case, but to just so callously throw someone away like that, without any meaning or love or hate behind it other than a massive ego, was repulsive. She narrowed her eyes at the reminders of that monster and what he did to her baby. It made her mad, so mad in fact that she heard a slight whimper below her. Looking down, she saw him staring up at her with that same guilt-ridden gaze as if he had inadvertently done something wrong. There was a slight element of fear in it now, but by and large it was filled with a shame at her displeasure. Blinking, Himiko smiled warmly and tried her best to reassure him with her touch. However, Izuku managed to sit back up to gaze at her with nothing but concern. "Are you alright? You kinda blacked out there for a minute dot and quat." She kissed him on the forehead and brought herself closer, letting him reach out and hold her while she slipped a finger inside herself. "Ah, I'm fine. Just thinking about old history dot and quat." He raised an eyebrow at her as he tried to slip two of his own fingers inside her as well. "Really? Right now when we're in the middle of this you decide to take a trip down memory lane and quat." Himiko knew eyes nearly popped out of her skull when she felt his fingers enter her. A wave of pleasure rolled over her that felt oddly ticklish while he began to move flex around like he was attempting sign language with only those two fingers. She soon felt a surge of embarrassment when certain noises started filling the room as air and her own fluid started to mix from the gap he was making as he dug in. A shiver rocked from her core, but she still found the mind to speak. Sorry about that, I quat." She paused as another surge of pleasure hit her from below as he curled his fingers around the start of her passage and rolled them over again. Now she could notice a smell in the air, and this fucking bastard boy took it as a K to double down. A moan escaped her lips and her breath was coming out in hot, panting heaves. They made eye contact again and another shiver came over Himiko when she saw what was in his eyes. It was that same intensity as when she bared his soul to her. It was ripe and old, older than time maybe, was the look in his eyes that was topped with that undying passion only he could have. Fear was there as well. Fear of pain and punishment, but it didn't matter to him at the moment and she knew it. He wanted her, needed her, and was going to have her. His soul screamed it and hers heard it as he leaned in. The sound grew louder and more frequent as he began to match the tempo of her moans while the smell of sweat and fluids covered the small room. Izuku was on his knees now, towering over her prone body, and with a twist of his free hand he turned the murderer on her back so that she was staring up at him. Without a word he clamped his mouth on one of her breasts, sucking and rolling the nipple with his teeth and tongue until there came a loud pop as he violently pulled away after he reached the height of his inhale on what had to be his fourth round of it, making sure to detach his teeth from her nipple while his other hand fondled her spare one. Himiko was practically screaming in pleasure now, sounding almost like a dog as Izuku continued to tend to her. It was so quick, so uncivilized that she hadn't had much time to really think or react, and now she felt his tongue drift along her neck and his breath beat into her ear as he teased at her earlobe before leaning so close she swore she could hear his heartbeat. "I love you dot and quat." It was low and hot, fueled by the most basic sort of emotion with his voice and little more than a whisper as he did everything to touch her. It made her want to scream his name, but it would have been useless since the fucker went down her neck and kissed the skin. She could feel his body crash against now, granting a nice, heavy sensation that with an unnerving loud pop as he withdrew his fingers as hard and as fast as he could while running them over her top wall that made her shiver despite the pain. One of his hands wrapped around the back of her head and gripped her skull as his head came up from below and kissed her square on the mouth. His tongue danced around hers, invading her mouth for a few breathless seconds before he pulled away. She could see him clearly now, and on his right hand was a dripping, sticky mess of thin, clear liquid. Without saying another word, Izuku brought himself closer as she looked up at him and stared her dead in the eye as he stuck those fingers into his mouth and licked them with the most depraved sort of face. Their hips were touching now and Himiko felt something hot and pulsating rest atop her pelvis. She didn't dare gaze down with how single-mindedly fixated on her he was, and involuntarily took a breath when she felt him dig his hands into her thighs and spread them apart. She didn't give any resistance to him and even wrapped her bare legs around his back, slowly closing them behind him. He continued to stare at her with those beautiful green eyes that burned with desire for her alone. She could feel something teasing at the entrance to her body that was gently forcing its way in, and in that moment she knew exactly what those eyes were trying to say. "I want to make life with you. To give myself totally to you and be given such in return so that something new and wonderful may be born. Let me do this. Let me become one with you so that our existences will have meaning. Let me have my children with you dot and quat." She knew that was what he was trying to do. Even on a conscious level they both somehow knew that was the goal. It wasn't just about the sensation, but that and something more. They both wanted to make lives together, to do as humans are made to do and breathe new life into this world that can hopefully be better than they. By God did she want that, to just throw her waist a little more forward and perhaps have new meaning and pleasure in her, their lives beyond the simply physical. They could have a family together and make a better life because by then they would have too. She wanted that. To have a permanent life with this man who adored such a monster like her, but Himiko knew better than that. They had a long way to go before such plans, and so breaking away from the godly haze of the moment, she spoke right as Izuku was about to thrust his hips forward. Pineapple. At once Izuku paused, staring at her like she had spoken Greek, but removed his hands and shifted himself away from her. He breathed like a bull in heat, and there was a fume of animalistic anger in those adoring eyes at the denial. He wanted to take her more than anything, but he controlled himself despite how much his chest heaved and heart pounded. He met her eyes and lacked the guilt he would have had previously, instead looking like he was torn between yelling at the woman he loved and kissing her until she was breathless. All the while that same intensity was there, barely caged in his soul, while he inadvertently stained the sheet slightly with his eagerness dripping off him. There wasn't a move to touch her, because they both knew he wouldn't stop the second time around. But not to be denied totally, Izuku picked up her hand and gently rubbed the knuckles like they were made of glass. I took it too far, didn't I? She stared at him with a heavy guilt in her eyes for saying no to him after he threw everything at her, but still she chose to stay at an arm's reach. It wasn't your fault, Zuzu, you were just being as a man should. If anything, I'm at fault for leading you on and not drawing a line before you got too excited. There was a spark of hot anger in his voice when he shot back. I'm still pretty fucking excited over here. She shrank back a bit at the lower fury in his words. I know, and I'm sorry. It isn't fair to you after you did so much to make me feel good. He glared at her for a moment, but breathed and let some of it go while he kissed her knuckles one after the other. His voice was much more frank now and less passion-filled. At this point, just let me stick it in your ass or something, because this shit is getting to me. Regret shined on his face the second the words left his lips, and he sighed apologetically. Crap, I didn't mean it like that. Himiko pursed her lips for a brief second and looked at him, then at the thing sticking out from his crotch. They studied each other as she chewed her lip, feeling her own body practically scream in protest at the abrupt halt of the action. Her fingers tapped against the lips of her groin and realized they were going to need something eventually, and letting him know her past had to be a slow and delicate process. Still, Izuku deserved something more than just being rubbed or brushing it against her. Hell, after that performance she wanted to give him something more. Damning the mistakes of her younger self 1,000 times again, Himiko decided to take it up the ass once more because of her stupid decisions. Only that had a far different meaning this time. Curling her knees under her chin and remaining silent for a moment, she exhaled and stared at the man who irrefutably loved her. Fine. If that's what you want, then next time, you can do that. Izuku looked at her with oddly measured eyes, likely due to being beyond the point of caring about his usual meekness. You're sure about that? She let her legs fall over each other to one side and tried to hide some of her apprehension. You let me bite and beat the shit out of you even though it isn't your favorite thing, because I like it. If all you're asking is to just stick it inside me, then it's the least I can do. A bit of sympathy glowed in his eyes as he ran a thumb over her hand. You don't have to force yourself for my sake. Himiko glared at him like he said the dumbest thing in the world. You already do it 100 times over for my sake. I'm just trying to return the favor because I know you at least deserve something from me. Izuku closed his eyes for a moment and shook his head. Whatever, I don't care, and right now I need to finish before I get blue balls, so can you please just stick your ass in the air like usual before I fall over screaming? The former villainess glared at him, but knew it was in truth a pointless argument. So she did as asked and set herself on all fours and slightly arched her back up. Go ahead. He needed no further invitation and grabbed her ass like it was the holy fucking grail. Himiko felt his hand seep into the flesh of her rear, and something warm slid between her cheeks and rested right above her back hole. She withheld a groan as her muscles tightened at the contact. It felt weird and vulnerable to have anything foreign touching there, but it was bearable. Yet to her surprise, instead of just thrusting his hips as life depended on it, Izuku took both his hands off her butt and removed his shaft from there. There came a loud pop from behind her and the sensation of fingers going inside her crotch, except this time it was much warmer and far wetter. She knew it was fingers from how they moved, but there soon came a feeling that made her shoot her head up like a goddamn gazelle in the tall grass. Her muscles clenched and her body stiffened when she felt some wet rest against her asshole, while this motherfucker kept fiddling around inside her privates like it was a puzzle box at the same time. And before she could say anything, that beautiful bastard spoke up like it was the most casual thing in the world. You mind if I stick a few in here? There were no words for the indignation and embarrassment she was currently feeling as she tried to glare at him from the corner of her eye. Hell yes, I mind. That's my ass you're playing with, and what the fuck happened to you needing to get off before you start hurting? She couldn't see his face, but she knew he was grinning like a fox as he ran what she hoped was just a thumb over her exit. His voice was smug and sounded way too sure of himself. Hey, this excites me enough to not drop off so I can do this for a while. Besides, is it weird that I rather like messing around with this thing? A blush came over her at how unbelievably nasty that was. Of all the things he could say about any part of her body, Why did it have to be that one? Just finish and stop trying to be a disgusting bastard ! And quat. Izuku chuckled and tapped her gently on the rear, running his free hand over it while he removed his fingers from her groin to fondle it a little more. That's a damn shame because we both know I'm going to ruin this thing come tomorrow. And quat. She growled with every ounce of indignation she could find. It wasn't like she was overly offended by it. If anything, if he found that part of her attractive, then maybe it might be a compliment. But the thought still grossed her out from what it did. You're fucking repulsive sometimes! And quat. The next thing Himiko felt was a hard smack on the ass and the sound of spitting, followed by something wet oozing right into her hole. Exactly, but you're the one with your pants down, and let's not forget you're a nasty fucker too, which one of the reasons I love you so goddamn much. And quat. There wasn't a chance to retort because Izuku proceeded to do what he originally asked for and gripped her rear for all he was worth. She could hear his breathing hitch as he thrusted between her cheeks, and she clenched her muscles from the sensation. His movements grew faster and faster until there finally came a moan from behind her. Himiko kept her eyes closed as she felt the aftermath spray on her back and land in some of her hair. She loved him, but she was learning to loathe cleaning up after they felt good. Of course, like usual, Izuku was leaning on her for support and running his hand over her belly, growling out the words she spoke in a low tone that cut him partly out of the afterglow. Go get me a towel. And quat. She knew he would wait. He always waited and tried to cuddle, but she pushed him away and the man she loved proceeded to complete the song and dance they made. A few seconds later, Izuku came back with a new towel she had bought recently. She was going through them like tissue paper thanks to him, and wiped her down. Another growl left her lips as raised herself up on the mattress. Take me to the shower. And quat. Like clockwork, Izuku scooped her up like she weighed nothing and carried her off to the bathroom, set her in the bathtub and turned on the cold water. Slowly Himiko stood and began to wash herself, only for Izuku to step in like she knew he would. He gripped her by the shoulder and kissed her deeply under the running water. They broke away and started to clean themselves of the filth of the act, but the blonde froze when she felt a hand grab one of her butt cheeks. Turning around, she saw him grinning like an idiot and rolled her eyes. Really, dude? And quat. He stepped under the water to wash away the soap from his body and smirked. It's not my fault, you have one of the best asses on earth. And quat. Himiko shook her head and shampooed the last of the spunk from her hair, glad to just get that whole business out of the way, though she felt a little disappointed that she hadn't gotten to nibble on him. Moments later, they stepped out of the tub and grabbed one of the many towels to dry themselves, during which Izuku spoke up. You know what you want for dinner? And quat. She shrugged as the water was patted off her body. Fuck if I know. You sure we can't order takeout? And quat. He gave her a look while he opened the door to the living room. No, we're gonna try and make some damn good food because it's cheaper. And quat. She returned the expression and raised 5 of her fingers. Okay, but number 1, do you know how to cook? Number 2, do you even have a recipe that can feed us both? Number 3, do you think I have any fucking ingredients to make anything? Number 4, do you really want to waste that time trying to make something that is likely going to taste bad? And number 5, can you really say no to pizza? And quat. Izuku sighed as he put on his clothes inside of the bedroom. No, on all accounts, but I just want to try and do something with you. And quat. She giggled as her pants were pulled back up, placing a hand over his cheek lovingly. And I deeply appreciate it, but right now I just want to relax. That and maybe bite you for a while. And quat. He froze for a moment as she leaned forward and kissed him, but to her mild surprise, Izuku grabbed the back of her head and stayed there for a few seconds. She smiled as he put a hand around her back and rested his forehead against her. Fine, just kiss me every so often while you're chomping on me. And quat. Himiko lightly dragged a nail over the side of his face and grinned, knowing she would get everything she wanted one day if she was patient enough. Sure thing, darling. And quat. The world rarely made sense anymore? Or was it that it never made sense and everyone just pretended that it did to get by? He guessed it didn't matter either way since he was still here even after everything. There had been 50, 70 people he had killed, and he learned to stop feeling bad about it before he took his first. After all, what the fuck did it matter since they were bad people and everyone cheered for him? He knew it was supposed to be wrong, but nobody stopped him. Hell, people paid him to do it, and those rats in the government kept him above the law 90% of the time. He was what people needed, and they needed a gun to wave around at anyone who wanted to upset the status quo, and when all might and endeavor couldn't keep up with the monsters of this world, they needed a new weapon to replace the broken ones. He knew he was never going to be anything more the second he saw that fugly hand-faced bastard, and he accepted it. He didn't love it, but he didn't hate it. It was just a job to him, and he got paid to do it while the others kept acting the parts of distractions for the public. He was the best, he was number 1, and this was what it got him. Fuck. He contemplated just walking into Tartarus every year and going cell to cell just to make his job easier and reweigh the scales. He knew he could get away with it. After all, who gave a fuck about a bunch of killers, rapists, and worse? Nobody would raise an eyebrow other than the people investing in the prison, and even then they could be dealt with by either blowing them up or just refusing to work until they were deposed. After all, Nobody gave a fuck about him anymore unless he paid them either in cash or blood. Round face hardly talked to him, spiky hair ran to the States, Icy Hot only talked to him about work and everyone else was scared of him. Auntie Inko only called every so often and even then it was just to make sure he was alive and his mother still blamed him for what happened to Dad. Really the only person he had now was Deku and honestly that was why he hadn't gone off to Tartarus and blasted the caged animals or started just killing street thugs instead of holding back. He didn't want to make the one person who always believed in him disappointed. The world may see him as a weapon only, but Deku saw him as a hero and a friend so he was worth suffering a bit. Sure he may have been rough with the geek, but it wasn't any different than when he pushed him off the slide or pushed him in the sand. Really he was just toughening the guy up for the world since nobody else was doing it. Besides it was just a little rough housing in their youth. He doubted Deku even remembered half of that shit. They even had rewind shots so those old scars were probably gone. He thought about the money again. He hoped it would help him get to a better place since Deku would doubtlessly do the same for him. So what was a few millions to him? He wiped his ass with that amount and it made Deku happy so it was worth it. He'd give more if the nerd wanted it since he could always make more, but Katsuki couldn't help not worrying in the silence of his house. It had been a day since he gave his number to Deku and the guy hadn't called. After so long there wasn't a chance in hell Deku wouldn't want to talk to his best friend and to add to it he wasn't at his apartment like he said he would be. Was he alright? Did something happen while he was away on the mission? Did some fucking villain get him? Get a grip you fucker. Deku just got 2 million so he's doubtlessly spending it with that weird ass girlfriend he supposedly has. And quat. The hero shook his head at the thought. He knew damn well how much power pussy had over a man and how it changes a person, but he wished Deku would be interested in hanging out with him than screwing his bitch. However they weren't kids anymore so Deku had some of his own life to live instead of endlessly following him around. Maybe he should call first instead. After all Deku probably thought he was busy with being the best. Yeah that was it, Deku was just being considerate that's all. It wasn't that he forgot about him and just took the money and ran, right? A tremor came over his hands. He fought them as he scrolled through his phone and found one of the 10 contacts and punched the speed dial. Briefly he was glad he had set Deku as his emergency contact with how ill he felt as the call waited to connect. His eyes closed and lowered his head, suddenly feeling like he was back inside that marble. Please pick up, please Deku. And quat. He quietly whimpered to himself as the dial tone kept going, praying that it went through. Then like a light in the darkness there came the voice that whispered to him at his lowest moments, telling him to keep going. Hello ? And quat. A smile grew on Katsuki's face as if he was a child again and his voice went an octane from the joy he felt. Hey Deku, just wanted to drop a line and make sure you were doing alright since you weren't at your apartment yesterday when I got off my job. So how's things with you right now ? And quat. There was a pause on the other line that was interrupted by a heavy sigh. Nothing much now. Girlfriend just fell asleep so I'm up just reading some cheap sci-fi novel she had laying around to kill time. Though I get the feeling she's gonna kill me for sneaking out of bed, but it's hard to sleep you know ? And quat. Katsuki nodded sympathetically despite having a gnawing feeling in his gut. I feel ya. So what's keeping you up ? And quat. Izuku said nothing for a moment with his voice plunging with guilt when the words came out. He sounded like the same old Deku as before and there was even a bit of regret in it. Did you really have to give me that? I'm glad to have it, but I don't know what to do. And quat. The blonde shrugged, not feeling the sense of financial dread in his friend's soul since he had long forgotten such basic worries long ago. It's fine man, really, you go use that stuff for whatever you want. Fuck, I can give you more if you need. And quat. In an instant Izuku's voice shot up to a high, urging tone that fit the image of the straight-laced nerd he knew. If Katsuki was there he could picture the geek waving a sweaty hand around and looking all over the place. No, I'm fine Kachan. You've already done more than enough. And quat. There was a trace of something in his voice that irked the hero. It was the same sort of polite restraint of pain that always, without fail, led to far greater problems in people's hearts. Something else is bugging you. What is it ? And quat. A few mumbles came next before the quirkless man inhaled and calmed down. His voice was flat and frank, like he had grown tired of his own inadequacies. I tried following your advice and bringing her into stuff other than sex, but she didn't humor me. I love this girl Kachan, but it's just been sparring or talking or fucking. We only went on one date in the past 6 months and, honestly that stuff you talked about had me worried. Things are good and strong now, but shouldn't there be more to what we do ? And quat. Katsuki laughed at the question. You're fine for now. If the lady wants to screw then screw, you have all the time in the world to add more stuff to your lives. Just, pace yourself and trust they won't disappear on you, because if you put too much emotional weight on it then it'll snap. Got it ? And quat. Relief filtered into Izuku's voice at his words. It was like hearing such simple advice eased whatever doubts the man was having. Got it Kachan. And quat. The pro smirked. Tally one more repayment to his light off the list and only 1 trillion plus more to go. Good. Now speaking of chicks, you mind explaining who tall, thin and scaly was in that picture ? And quat. The relief vanished from his soul without a hint of decay, leaving a heavy cloth of pain, regret and other feelings Katsuki couldn't label from voice alone. It was a small, quiet yet firm beyond belief point with the pressure of years behind it. I don't want to talk about it. Unquote. If ever there was a time for Katsuki to pick up on the mood of another, he decided it was now and chose to drop the topic faster than he dropped Shigaraki's bloody corpse on the pavement. That's fine. So, what did you got planned for the week? I called up your work and they said you took 7 days off once the paperwork got turned in. Frankly, I can't blame you when you had to work in a dump like that. Unquote. A grin got plastered over the hero's face when he pictured something that he himself needed more than he cared to admit. Hey, how about you and me go hang out somewhere tomorrow? We could even go to Junto Land like we wanted back when we were kids. Unquote. A sharp inhale came from the other line that was the go-to habit for every adult who wanted to let someone down gently. Look, that does sound nice, but I need to. Unquote. There was the sound of light footfall from Deku's end, the sort made when someone wanted to be heard coming. Instantly his entire demeanor changed to one far more relaxed and jovial. Hey, sorry if I woke you up. Unquote. A laugh came next from the quirkless man, one Katsuki had never heard in his lifelong association with the geek. Yeah, I'll come to bed in a minute, just let me in. Quote. Springs squeezed and leather whined in the next heartbeat with what could only be described as a shuffling sound coming next. Geez, you can't wait a few seconds? Alright you pretty thing, we can stay here for a while. Unquote. There came a sharp, wet smacking sound that doubtlessly came from a kiss, then Deku brought his attention to the call again, sounding more at ease and happy than he had ever heard the man. I'll talk to you later dude, I got a needy blonde to take care of. Unquote. The call ended without missing a beat, leaving the hero alone again in his home. His fingers gripped around the device and squeezed it, the power of his overly trained palm snapping the inner glass while sweat beaded down in a mounting anger. There was a loud boom as his hand ignited and combusted the phone. Looking down at the ruin of a perfectly good phone, Katsuki growled as his fist flew forward and slammed into the drywall. Wood snapped and plaster broke when he removed his hand, moving himself down to the training room on the first floor and setting his sights on the heavy bag once the automatic lights flipped on. Stupid fucking Deku. Here he was trying to be nice and spend a little time with his best friend, but that idiot would rather pound some crazy bitch than hang out with the guy who always had his back. Sure, there were other chances for them to spend time together, but it was the principle of the matter. He wanted to see his friend again and relive their old memories and go to places they never could have in youth. Couldn't Deku have done that for him at least? Throwing a high kick at the bag, Katsuki mentally shook his head. It wasn't Deku's fault. The man had obligations to his life and at the moment whoever that bitch is was a part of it. He understood that, but he couldn't banish the feeling of fury that it brought. Deku was his best friend, he'd be there in a flash if that idiot needed anything and what he got in return was a write-off? Maybe if he had a pussy then the geek would have tried harder to reconnect. Sighing as he began to break a sweat, the hero wiped down the bag and threw his gloves to the side. He needed to sleep and worrying about little things wasn't going to help that. Deku was still his #1 supporter, he'd always be in his corner so it was right to let the guy have his space. Taking himself up into his bedroom, Katsuki threw his clothes off and cranked up the AC to keep from sweating in his sleep. Last thing he needed was to blow up another mattress. Yet he needed to do the thing like always before falling asleep, so he turned towards his closet and opened it. Searching around near the back, the explosion user pulled out a small black metal box. He hesitated for a moment as sweat gathered on his palms with fear and anger flooding his brain. Taking the emotions down and calming himself, he slowly dialed in the code for the lock inside along with scanning his fingerprint until the hydraulic arms lifted the lid to reveal what was inside. He glared at the thing like it was a key to hell, and it may as well be with who it originally belonged to. Resting in the box was a bronze-coated hand a little smaller than his that once held the entire world hostage and murdered his father. His only trophy from the war and his only reminder that his worst nightmare was truly dead. That bastard couldn't be alive without his hand, so he had to be gone. Yet even as the evidence stared him in the face, Katsuki couldn't help but grimace. Nobody on Earth knew where the rest of that monster was since it was mysteriously lost in transport with nobody even finding the driver or the truck or the security crew. But he had to believe that the monster was gone, that he couldn't come back, otherwise he'd never sleep again. Deku was in his life again, so things were looking up. He would rebuild his old memories one by one with his best friend and then be able to live a happy, carefree life with Deku. The only thing he needed to do was hunt down that shapeshifting bitch and gut her along with the remnants of the Carmen regiment that vanished in the aftermath, and everything would be okay. He'd get to be a kid again and nobody bad would ever hurt him or his friends again. He just wished he could call up round face one more time, but she always tried to keep him at an arm's length. Putting the box away and locking it, the #1 hero set himself on his mattresses and laid bare on the sheets with only the locket around his neck. Reaching out to his nightstand, he undid a cool bottle of water and put 3 sleeping pills in his mouth and swallowed with aid of the liquid. He was proud of himself for not mixing them with whiskey like a few weeks ago, but as he laid there, Katsuki felt clammy, dead fingers resting on his chest, and saw a horrible, decaying face grin at him with malicious red eyes. Sweat formed all over his body as his brain screamed at him to attack, to flee, but the man glared at the thing. "You're not real. You're just a figment of my imagination. I killed you so you can't be real. And quat," he said like so many times before as he reached for the small pendant around on his chest and opened it. He stared at the picture, one of him and Deku when they were little, like it could shine even the worst of darkness away. His thumb caressed the photo and before long the specter of the demon was gone. He smiled as a tear crawled down his cheek at the memories. "Don't worry Deku, Ka-chan is here to make everything okay now and we can have fun like we used to. Nobody will hurt you so long as I'm around and I promise everything is gonna be nice and kind and warm because you helped me so damn much. I love you man, I love you like a brother and I'm sorry I was never there when you needed help. If you were around with those quirk notebooks we probably would have figured out how to beat that old bastard before Shigaraki could use his power. And quat. He sniffled as more tears came, feeling all the pain of his time come crashing down like it did every night when he talked to Deku. "I wish you could have met Spiky Hair. He was such a great guy that I'm sure you would have been great friends. Maybe you could have even married Frog Legs since you both were such weirdos. I am missed you so damn much Deku, and quat." At last it came undone and he began to cry in earnest as the damage of holding the whole world up came to him. He shut the locket and just forgot himself in his sorrow for an innocence long lost until his throat was hoarse and his eyes dry. He shivered and whimpered before gazing up at his original All Might poster which had his idol smiling down at him, reminding him what he fought for. He stared back in reverence for the man, understanding the pain in those blue eyes and amazed the Titan could smile all the while. Turning over onto his side, Katsuki shut his eyes as the pills took effect and soon he was somewhere else. He was 4 again, playing on a warm summer's day with Deku on a playground feeling like it would never end and the two of them would be friends forever, away from all the evils in this world. Uraka wanted to scream into her pillow. Why? Oh, why did her life have to turn out like this? First she was so fucking wealthy that she practically needed to support her parents who she dearly loved, but was starting to hate with how often they asked if she had found someone yet. Then she had to deal with Katsuki's angry, dick-headed ass every other week despite the fact a part of still adored that man for how brave, strong and devoted he could be and missed having him absolutely annihilate her. But to top it off Himiko had gotten involved with yet another fucking weirdo who she'd inevitably have to deal with regardless of her finding him admittedly cute and seeing something of a decent person in the guy and wishing the best for the person she regarded as her greatest success as a hero and one of her best friends. It was all on her to deal with and right now she wished she could just relax in her chair with a bottle of bourbon in one hand and a menthol in the other, preferably with a partner waiting for her in bed, but she couldn't. She was a Ravity, the savior of goddamn everyone and so that was all she was. Her chances of having a normal life or just having friends who weren't scarred or mental wrecks were gone the second she got into UA. She didn't regret it and loved her job, but sometimes she wished she could have gone into modeling or computer science. At least then she could have gotten to know people who weren't fucked up. Sighing, the heroine laid herself down on her couch and closed her eyes. Work was coming again in 10 hours and then there was Himiko's checkup and the charity thing to deal with later on in the month. Thinking, all the brunette could find was her research on Himiko's new flame. That was the only thing in her life right now that didn't directly relate to her work, even if the guy had no idea about the stuff behind the scenes. He was nice enough, but had the aura of a beat puppy which surprised her that Himiko even put up with that kind of person since she only dated those she admired and quat. Maybe Greenie had a big cock or was just willing to put up with her sexual tastes. Whatever the case he wasn't too much of a creep, but there was something off about him. Not in a dangerous way like Himiko, but more in the I'm in horrible pain way that she'd seen all the time in her career. He spoke the world of Himiko last time they talked so that was likely going well and wasn't one-sided or abusive. Though Uraka couldn't help feeling jealous of that bloodsucker. She cared about Himiko, but she managed to get a partner and there was always that saying Grandmama had about tiny men, quiet men fucking the hardest and the most passionately. God, how long had it been? Katsuki was the last person she'd been with and that was years ago. She knew getting a hookup would be easy but she wanted a boyfriend, not some fling she'd regret the day after. It wasn't like there were a lot of men interested in loving her and not a Ravity. She had a fan club and even knew of a few pornos that used her outfit, but she tried to be a dignified example for people. Sometimes she'd find someone who didn't know who she was and they'd hit off, but then the guy would just fucking ghost her. Part of her suspected Katsuki was behind it, but he had some faith in him not to stoop that low. After all, he was still a hero even if he was flawed. Sipping the water on the coffee table, the anti-gravity hero bemoaned herself at the prospect of another night alone and overworked. She was still worried about whether she'd get the chance to even have children at this rate with how her life was going. Fuck, Himiko had a better chance of becoming a mother and getting married than her now. Shit, she might even be getting laid right while the girl who did everything right was becoming a lonely old lady. Opening her eyes and glaring at the walls around her, Uraka huffed at the unfairness of it all. She wanted a life, a husband and 2 kids at least, maybe more, but her job had taken it. Katsuki had his mind wrecked from the war. She had to work around the clock and might die at a young age from it, and everyone was either out for her money, fame or her body. It was fucking unfair. It was unfair that cunt was getting everything while she was stuck here to silently suffer. Where was her Prince Charming or broken bad boy or put upon geek? Where were her gaggle of friends she could talk bullshit with and watch each other's kids while their husbands worked? Why didn't she get anything? Didn't she do good? Inhaling Uraka buried some of her angst and sipped her water. It wasn't like complaining would do her any good. She was still in the prime of her life with her health in good condition, fertile as a member of her family can be, and wealthy enough to retire if she wanted. So she had options and a future. Though at the moment all she wanted was a good talk, some dinner with someone and a mean dicking. Christ, that just would melt her issues away, wouldn't it? To just release all her fears and frustrations to another person who loved her with all his heart, only to then bare herself to him like a nasty little demon. Oh, she would pay for that. Still, she had responsibilities and those came first. Yet for some reason her mind drifted to Midoriya again. He was a string pole of a guy with barely an ounce of muscle and a slightly below average height, but for some reason she could stop picturing what his junk might look like. After all, that length had to go somewhere. She must be truly desperate, but he was the only guy she knew that didn't either have a history with her from the war or just wanted to be seen with a Ravity. If anything, he was pretty damn chill, and if she hadn't needed to look out for Himiko's interest, then she had no doubt he'd be something to look into, even if he was a little weird, or maybe that was the years-long dry spell talking. He didn't seem like a degenerate or a bad person, and she learned to spot those signs. Then again, that guy had the honor of being Himiko's longest-lasting relationship, and that girl always let her tastes be known, so there had to be a little off with him. Maybe she could save him like she saved Himiko and tried to save Katsuki? After all, he did seem like that lonely, bullied geek who'd jump at getting a woman's attention. Getting to know him wouldn't be bad in any case, and if his personality was more attuned to her and something went wrong between him and Himiko, well, he could certainly be a backup plan to try if she was still single. Personally, she adored the idea of being that disgusting hick who just enchanted some broken soul and had them wrapped around her finger while they unleashed themselves on her. Heck, she rather liked the thought of getting screwed by that scrawny fuck, assuming he had the gusto. Ah, what the hell was she saying? This wasn't her. She wasn't this needy, horny bitch who jumped at the potential for a relationship that was likely never going to happen with a man she barely knew. She had more self-worth and respect for herself than that. Besides, that guy could be worse than Himiko. That was one type of crazy she wasn't going to tolerate in her love life, no matter how lonely she was. Or maybe he's actually a really lovely guy who fate shat on for forever, and that's why he ended up with Himiko of all 8 billion people in the world. Or maybe Himiko's perfect for him and she was just being a backstabbing cunt who didn't have faith in her friend? Should she ask him out, just to get more info on him to find out what he's really about? She didn't believe Himiko would get violent with her of all people, but she was really invested in this guy from what she told her. She actually risked giving up her chastity to this man, and that was beyond important to the girl. Maybe this was Himiko's chance to finally be happy. If it was and it worked out, then Uraka would cheer them both on all the way. If it flopped, then she'd scoop him up and make sure her friend was okay, assuming he wasn't a complete freak. A silent, truly scared part of her that feared she'd be alone forever because of Katsuki and her own choices in life whispered the question of whether Himiko would be willing to share him with her if he was a match for her. Since at least that way she could have children and a husband who wasn't a danger to himself or her or their potential children. Himiko was always a lonely freak who admitted to being sexually attracted to her, and she was submissive to her demands, so it might be a possibility if she really had no other options. Maybe if she was single by 30 it could be a plan if she had literally nowhere else to go, but for now she had to get a grip and look at her abilities as a person. Then there was work, and that drained 85% of her energy every fucking day. Would she actually have to enter into a weird 3-way relationship with Himiko and this guy? It was disgusting, but she knew she'd be safe and the sex would certainly be crazy. Fuck, the thought of being subjected to those 2 repressed perverts almost made her excited in a fucked up way. She had kissed Himiko one time when she was drunk after she broke up with Katsuki, and she kinda liked it, but there was too much of a professional quality to their friendship. Though it wasn't completely unheard of for sponsors to date their charges. Ah, there she goes with the crazy talk again. It was getting late and she needed to sleep. Being up this long was making her delirious. She didn't know a damn thing about this guy, and Himiko firmly called dibs, though she could always just use them both since Himiko wouldn't mind. Why did she have these thoughts? God damn it, Katsuki wasn't so fucked in the head then she wouldn't have to worry about being alone, but she wasn't good enough to help him. She just couldn't do it and made things worse even though she loved him more than anyone. It just didn't work out and she hated herself for it. But what was she supposed to do after he got so damn crazy that he said he'd off himself if she left? She was a hero, he knew that, and even if she did want to be something of a housewife and a mom, she had seen too much bad to not keep going. Besides, it would have gotten worse for them both. Katsuki never laid a hand on her, but he'd smash things all the damn time and wake up crying and screaming. Then there was dealing with his bitch of a mother. Honestly, how the fuck could that bitch blame him for what happened to her husband, his father? There were times that she wanted nothing more than to be in his arms again when it was cold, or ask him to take her like he did in their high school days, but she loved him too much to be that selfish. She would have stayed by his side until it killed her for how wonderful he made her feel, but she knew it would end in one of them dead, and she knew it wouldn't be her even if she would have accepted that. So she was by herself, childless and overworked because the man she adored was too broken despite her wishing it were otherwise. They both needed to move on, and she was doing her best to forget those feelings, but they were ungodly strong. Katsuki was her first everything. He turned her from a hopeful into a hero and a girl to a woman, and there would always be a part of her that worshipped him as her scared little puppy that only she could understand. But she was wise enough to know that would only end very badly, otherwise she wouldn't have ever left his well-toned ass. So she had to deal with reality and try to salvage some of her life like Himiko had. If this Midoriya guy was who was left for her to take, then so be it. At least she'd be able to forget the pain by then. It was getting close to bedtime now, and so she banished most of her thoughts, leaving only the itch between her legs that irked her. Disappointed at herself, Uraka moved to her bedroom and opened her bottom drawer where she kept her things. They were a gift from Midnight Sensei when the vixen had found out about her relationship with Katsuki when they were caught doing it under the stairs by the very same woman. Sadly, it was one of the only things she had to remember, the hero who helped her learn so much about herself and how to have a healthy relationship. Setting herself on the bed and removing her pants, the heroine shifted herself into position and once again saw Midoriya's face and more staring back at her while she worked to manage herself. As she did so, Uraka couldn't help but tear up at how her life had gotten to this point before just closing her eyes and letting her mind drift away from her worldly troubles. Izuku wrinkled his nose at the stink of warm, bubbling copper filled the air and wafted up from the cup. A voice to his left rang out and he rolled his eyes before even knowing what she would say. "Come Greenie, you lost the bet, so drink up." And quat. That was true. He did not manage to balance those 10 pens on his fingers, so it was only fair. But it was a warm cup of cow's blood, so he was naturally apprehensive. Looking at the woman he cherished, Izuku shrugged and took a swig of the stuff. It wasn't bad per se, thick with a heavy taste of iron and something else, but he wouldn't choose the stuff if there were other choices. Which was good, considering this stuff had the potential to be toxic if he consumed too much. Still, he was a little disappointed that he didn't get to see her do a backflip, but what could you do? Reaching out to the girl as he put the cup down, he kissed her forehead and laid a hand on her arm. There were 6 more days off. More money to spend than he could believe, and he had the adoring eyes of the woman he loved set squarely upon him, so everything was fine as can be. Himiko winced a little and grabbed him by the cheeks and snapped forward. Her lips touched his and she held it for a few seconds. Pulling her mouth away, she latched onto his arm and glared at him. "If you're gonna do something, do it fucking right." And quat. He smirked and ran his fingers through her long, ratty hair. She had the scent of one who had foregone bathing, but he didn't mind. So long as she was with him, then it was fine. The girl grunted, but leaned her head towards his palm as moved it to her cheek and gently turned it. Of course, as always, she had those cute purple bags under her eyes and that slightly pissed face that he had learned to love. He sighed and squished her against him, enjoying the closeness. Himiko struggled a bit to break free, but that was impossible with how much stronger he was than her. Lips contacted her neck, and to her silent delight, he began to suckle and nibble. Putting a hand over her belly, Izuku dug his fingers in and caressed it possessively. "She's gained some weight. Good. She's eating well." And quat. He nuzzled his cheek against her and tipped over with her in tow as they both laid there silently. It was little moments like this he lived for, and he knew she did too while they listened to the ticking of the clock. She fumbled and tossed and finally turned when he begrudgingly lessened his lung-crushing hold. The blonde scowled at him and ran a hand down his back, feeling every bump and dent in his charred flesh. "You're a fucking asshole sometimes, you know that?" And quat. Izuku laughed and shifted a leg over her rear, staring at her with adoring eyes, knowing she's going to break soon enough if he keeps it up. "Yes, but I do it from a place of love because you mean the damn world to me, you nasty fucker." And quat. She rolled her eyes and dug her head into his shoulder while one of his hands rolled over her back and unclipped her bra as he laid his tongue on her earlobe. Himiko growled like a kitten was and rubbed her legs against his lower torso. "You just make it so hard sometimes for me to figure you out. Like I don't know what you fucking want from me and it gets to me." And quat. Izuku squinted his eyes as all playfulness left him at once. He shifted on the sofa and looked the woman in the eyes. "All I want is your love, devotion and loyalty. Have I not made that clear enough?" And quat. It wasn't an accusatory tone or a "how fucking dare you" thing, but more of a "is something the matter?" She shook her head and put herself on his torso, wrapping her arms around him as they sat back up. "Zuzu, it isn't that. I know you love me, but I don't know what you want from me. Like, what am I doing to help you get satisfied or happy? Am I doing too much? Too little? Should we do more stuff together? Am I treating you right?" And quat. The quirkless man smiled and held her tighter. He kissed the small of her neck and shook his head. Darling, you're doing everything you can to make me the happiest man on earth. Yeah, your tastes are unique, but that's just a compromise so that you can be happy and satisfied with my body. So long as you aren't ripping chunks out of me, then it's fine. And quat. Her golden eyes turned to stare at him with a heavy hand of guilt washing over her beautiful face. So you don't have anything to complain about in regards to me? Even me denying you last night? And quat. Izuku shrugged and ran his fingers through her hair again. He squeezed her a little harder, making her squeak as he held her like she was his most valuable thing. Hey, it's mainly petty shit and we compromised last night, so all's good. Granted, I'd rather throw myself at you like a goddamn truck until you start walking with a limp because you're my darling, but I get progress. And quat. Another growl came and she violently shifted to one side in his arms before staring at him. They made eye contact, but Himiko still found her will to speak about her worries. Why are you so obsessed with fucking me? You clearly have a better and easier shot at pussy with pink bitch and you don't even gotta get hurt to get there. Is it because I'm a virgin and it makes your ego swell knowing you might take it? Because otherwise, why the fuck are you so patient with me not throwing my back out to you after so long? And quat. Again Izuku shrugged with his fingers gently scratching her scalp almost unknowingly. His spare hand drifted to her chest and slipped inside her garments where he began to fondle and play with her nipples. Because I want to knock you up. And quat. Himiko flinched like she had been punched. Turning her head in disbelief, she looked like he just said he murdered a man. What? And quat. He raised an eyebrow at her reaction and let go out of concern. I want to have children with you, Himiko. You've already proven you're not a whore and trustworthy enough to where we can do rough stuff. You're my everything, so if I need to wait a while before we get there, then that's fine. And quat. She leapt from the couch and backed herself to the wall. Her heart was pounding and sweat was gathering on her skin like fire had been placed next to her. You actually want to have children, babies, with me? And quat. Izuku flipped himself on his back and took up the couch as he laid there without a care in the world. Yep, I want to marry you too. Maybe not this minute or year, but sometime before the next 3 years. There a problem with that? And quat. She breathed in to calm herself and rubbed her arms, but suddenly it was like her head was swimming. No, maybe, I don't fucking know. Marriage, that's something years away for us, but kids, I'm not sure. My quirk is fucked and my parents messed me up bad when I was growing up, so how do I know I won't make another me? And quat. He laughed softly as he stared up at the ceiling. Slowly he threw a gesturing finger to his beloved. Because I'm here to help you and there's gonna be 50% of me in that child, so I can assure you he'll likely be a crybaby. Besides, there's always the chance his quirk will be weaker than yours or just not as high on the Lindsay scale. Regardless, I'm eventually gonna break your back, so just keep that in mind. And quat. A heavy blush came over the slasher as she heard that. She was standing over him now, shaking in embarrassment and bewilderment. Leaning down, she slapped him on the chest. You fucking bastard. I don't fucking know. Maybe we could have kids, but that's a long way away. For now, could you just stuff yourself away in my room or go somewhere for a couple hours since I gotta get started on work? And quat. Without skipping a beat, Izuku knuckles his pants and whips out his manhood like it was the most normal thing in the world. Can I get a little something before I go? Or do you need a touch-up? And quat. Himiko stared at his cock and groaned like it was the bane of her existence. No, just hang out somewhere or be quiet for a while. You can live without climaxing every fucking minute. And quat. He planted a hand on her ass and squeezed with a coy smile. Not when such a beautiful woman like you is the center of my damn world. And quat. She glared even more at him. Just go. I'll see you in a few hours. And quat. Zipping himself up and kissing the woman, Izuku patted her softly on the back. Alright, I'll go bugger off so you can get those columns done. You want me to pick up anything while I'm out? And quat. Himiko returned the kiss and hugged him a bit. Not right now. Just stay out of trouble and come home when I call. We'll have some fun tonight when you get back. And quat. Izuku smirked once more. The butt stuff sort of fun? And quat. Another blush came over her as she stared at the ground. Yes, you greedy fucker. I'll get myself ready before you come back. And quat. He hugged her once more and finally let her go. Moving towards the door, Izuku gave her a thumbs up. See ya in a while, darling. I'll be counting the minutes. And quat. A blown kiss and a turn of the doorknob later, Izuku was making his way out to the streets and heading to the one place that he could kill a few hours by journeying to the other side of the city. Heck, he needed the space to gather his thoughts and the food was good, so off he went. Walking along the miles to reach the beating heart of the landscape, Izuku followed the walls of the buildings, avoiding back alleys and taking the correct twists in the roads that before long ended him up at Toshi's pub. He hadn't been here in a while, preferring to head straight to Himiko's for obvious reasons. Christ, how long has it been since he talked to Sato or Mina for that matter? Well, it had only been a week, so it wasn't like he hadn't vanished off the face of the earth. Still, it was always good to keep in touch. Entering the darkened bar, he saw very few people, perhaps only 5, which was expected for a Tuesday. Though to his mild disappointment, Mina wasn't here. Not that he came to explicitly see her, of course. Then again it was still 3 in the afternoon, so everyone was likely at work. Putting that fact aside, Izuku moved towards the counter and paused when he saw someone nursing a drink with the most dejected face he'd ever seen. Ochaco Uraka was glaring at the bottom of her glass like it had murdered her family, looking for all the world the same bitter, resentful and spiteful example of humanity. Izuku was before meeting Himiko. The world didn't seem to exist to the heroine, and she didn't respond to his presence until he was standing over the seat next to her. Gazing up, Ochaco saw the quirkless sidekick and focused all her ire on him, though Izuku could have sworn her cheeks had gotten a little red rather than pink when they made eye contact. "The fuck you want?" and quat. He smiled sympathetically at the woman and gestured to the empty seat with an open palm. "May I?" and quat. She rolled her eyes and took another swig of her liquor. "Knock yourself out, you fucking freak." And quat. Sitting down and ordering a beer from the server, Izuku opened his ears and prepared to waste some time. "So is the booze hitting hard, or did you just have a rotten day?" and quat. She took a sip and growled. "Try a rotten fucking life. Been doing nothing but the right thing and I keep getting screwed over while other people get everything they want." And quat. Izuku shrugged as he opened the brew. "That's how shit is sometimes. Getting angry about it isn't gonna help you get better, believe me on that." And quat. Ochaco scoffed at the sidekick. "Change? I'd love to change, but I can't because people need me and it's consuming everything about my life. I haven't even, forget it. This whole hero stuff is fine, but I want to be a normal person sometimes." And quat. Again Izuku shrugged and sipped the bitter drink. "That's the price of doing the right thing sometimes. Besides, you've saved." And quat. In a flash the heroine spun around and jabbed a finger in his chest as her face was now fresh with rage. "Don't start with that. I know I did good and people look up to a Ravity, but that's all I am to most people. I give and I give until nothing is left, and while I'm happy to give, when the fuck am I gonna get something back? When is someone gonna come along and make my life better?" And quat. A solemn expression came over Izuku as he responded. "Expecting someone to make everything better is only gonna make you feel more helpless. If you want things to change, then you need to fucking work for it, and maybe you need a push to start getting what you want, but only you alone can make it happen because nobody is gonna do the work for you." And quat. Brown eyes studied him for a moment and grew silent for a minute. "How the fuck did a guy like you manage to pair up with Himiko of all fucking people? You're not an overt pervert and you seem actually nice and have some wise shit to say every so often. What the fuck makes you so gaga over her?" And quat. Izuku blinked, unsure that he heard correctly. "Excuse me, what?" And quat. Ochaco set her glass aside and grabbed a fresh one from the barkeep, raising it up to the green-haired man. "Yeah, Himiko told me all about how she loves you and how you almost popped her cherry that one night. Then the poor thing showed up at your place sobbing her eyes out because she thought you abandoned her, but you swoop in like Prince fucking Charming and hold her that entire night until you both fall asleep. She also said how you sucked on her tits too, so you also got that going for you." And quat. She broke her lips on the cup and drank. "Personally, I have no clue how you two work, but you seem to do. You're actually the first person she considered giving her V card to, and you keep making her not as crazy, which is an astonishing achievement, let me tell you. Personally, I'm glad you're helping her, but it makes me wonder what you get out of it." And quat. Okay, so he hadn't misheard. Uraka knew Himiko, knew her well enough to be confided in, and had an understanding of her mental state. Logic dictated that she had to be that hero Himiko said helped her after the war. That answers a few questions. The only thing left is to speak. "I get her love and loyalty, that's all a man needs." And quat. Ochaco snorted in contempt. Back in the day her definition of love was way different, and even if she did get much better and I'm proud of her for it, she's still that weird bitch who gets off on seeing people bleed. So her love isn't just kisses and blowjobs. And quat. The man shrugged and set his beer to the side as he signaled for a cola. "No relationship ever is. It's just taking the good with the bad and loving them regardless of either. Expecting perfection from anyone is just plain unfair." And quat. Another scoff came as she raised the glass to her lips. "If she ever says she wants to make you perfect, then you better fucking run. Besides the point, her imperfections, as you say, is that she likes seeing people in pain because it gets her off. Honestly, I have no clue how you stand it. I mean, bravo for making her happy and dialing back the crazy, but just how and why? Like she talks about you like you can hold up the sky, and she never talks that way about anyone anymore." And quat. His response was frank and to the point without a hint of doubt in the words as pop the tab on the can. "Because there's more to her than that. Yeah, you're right in that she gets off on that kind of stuff, but that's only one part of who she is. Himiko has been by my side when I was at my lowest and pushed me to get better and improve my life while never once expecting anything in return other than I make good on my dreams. She's loyal beyond comparison and I'm proud to have her in my life. I even plan to pop the question eventually. If I need to get bit and punched or worse to keep her happy, then so be it." And quat. Ochaco stared at him with unreadable eyes as her ire faded away. They stared at each other with the man confused and the woman just watching him. She scooted herself to the edge of her barstool and studied him, taking note of the slight depression in his shoulders that had his shirt dipped down. Her lips, light, pink and rosy, pursed as she decided to finally speak. You really are something else, Midoriya, you really fucking are. Honestly, I had my reservations about you, still kinda do, but Himiko wouldn't be that serious without a damn good reason, and I can see it. Nobody would willingly put up that much bullshit for so long, much less consider marrying her unless they really did care. Hell, she hasn't even complained once about anything, which is fucking rare. I'm glad she has you in her life. And quat. A slight blush overcame the green-haired man as he sipped his pop. Clearing his throat, Izuku smiled warmly at the brunette, eager to move the subject away from his lover. There were still a few hours to kill. So enough about me and mine, what about you? What's got you so down? And quat. Ochaco shrugged and set her drink aside and motioned for water in lieu of another alcoholic beverage. The bitterness on her face softened a bit and she shook her head. Just petty bullshit that I'd rather not talk about. Really, I'm just being a bitch about things. Been working too much and it's got me pissed. And quat. Izuku copied her as he thought for a moment about his own battle with work. It's just you being human, Uraka. Everyone needs time to unwind. You do great things for society and people look up to you, but I get it. You want to just sit back for a while and breathe instead of always being this, pardon my frankness here, action figure for people to admire. I mean, wearing a mask like that has to be exhausting after so long. And quat. The lady nodded in approval as she sipped her water. Took the words out of my mouth, but I'd rather not complain and just get myself pissed off. I think I need to. And quat. She paused for a moment and looked at the sidekick again. Her hazel eyes tracked the outline of his form in his baggy clothes and rested solely on his groin for a moment before staring at his emerald-colored hair. Okay, this is gonna be really weird, but I gotta know, do the curtains match the drapes? And quat. Izuku blinked for a moment, unsure of what she was asking. Then he followed where she was looking at and then it hit him. A blush covered him and a wave of discomfort washed over him along with a spark of masculine pride he strangled with his devotion to his lover. He tore his eyes away from the heroine and shifted in his seat. Why do you want to know that of all things? And quat. Ochaco rolled her wrist until there was a sharp pop from the cartilage and she stared at him almost casually, but there was also a glow of insistence in the way she spoke. Because she's never told me and I'm curious because you're quirkless. That hair color isn't exactly baseline, so, what's up? Does it travel down or not? And quat. Why was he starting to sweat? Who asks these kinds of questions? Was she coming onto him like last time? Tugging at the collar of his sweatshirt, Izuku laughed nervously while this woman practically stared right into his soul, expecting an answer. He rubbed the back of his neck and looked away from those piercing orbs as guilt, worry and a small bit of excitement tingled at the base of his neck. Well, yeah, I never thought about it, but, I guess it does. And quat. She glared at him like he said the dumbest thing he could have possibly said. You guess or you know. Which is it? And quat. Izuku laughed again, suddenly wishing that he was anywhere else. I know. And quat. Ochaco nodded in approval as she got up from her seat and stared at him with a rather coy grin. Okay, good to know. Broccoli shrub. Now would you mind walking me over to Himiko ''s ? And quat. He stared at her with wide eyes like she just admitted to murder. Why? And quat. A flip phone was in her hand in a split second as she punched in speed dial with an affronted glare directed at the man. Because nobody is at my place, everyone else is at work and you two are the only options I have left. And quat. The call connected right as Izuku was about to retort, leading to the girl speaking over him in a tone that sounded far too sweet for how she just acted. Hey Miko, how you doing? And quat. She smiled and nodded like a pink-cheeked bobblehead. Oh, that's good. So hey, I'm coming over in like an hour. And quat. A look of bubbly disbelief came over her as her padded hand flapped up and down to deny whatever was said. Nah, it ain't anything like that. I'm just bored out of my head with nothing to do and figured you'd be pretty lonely without me around. And quat. She looked at Izuku and grinned an almost predatory grin as she stepped beside him and entrapped one of his arms around hers in a vice-like grip. Oh, that's no issue. He's here at the bar with me and said he wouldn't mind, seeing how you and I go way back. Ah, sure, you talked to him. And quat. Without another warning, the phone was put up to his ear. Not handed to him, but held up like he was a hostage. Feeling the woman wrap one of her admittedly super soft fingers around the joint of his index, he was starting to feel like one. The heroine glared at him with a tight-lipped smile that felt even worse than when Himiko first had him at knife point. Deciding to get whatever the hell this was out of the way, he leaned into the device and spoke. Hello? And quat. A voice came through that was fraught with bewilderment and apprehension, one he adored beyond anything else. Izuku, why the hell is Arabity saying you invited her to our home? And quat. He flinched, but couldn't move with how he suddenly lost the sensation of all weight in his body and was hovering a few centimeters above the floor. Uraka kept that strangely sadistic smile about herself and remained silent. Not sure what to make out of any of this, he chose to focus on his darling, if only to ensure he wasn't about to hit the ceiling. Well, I didn't. She invited herself and sidelined me to come along. And quat. A massive sigh came from the former villain that lacked any of the edge of her previous question. Jesus fucking Christ, I see what you mean. Look baby, she's gonna pop over a visit and I owe Cheeky a lot, so don't give her any shit, okay? We can mess around later, for now just be nice and don't say anything weird. I love you. And quad. The call ended and Izuku couldn't help but feel strange at hearing Himiko be so resigned. It wasn't a good feeling, but he didn't have long to process it since he felt weight return to his body and be walked towards the door. The phone was closed and slotted into the heroine's pocket before she lessened her hold on his arm as they headed back the way they came. Ochaco sighed and dropped the threatening smile. Now she appeared like she had aged 20 years in seconds. Fuck me, I'm sorry. It's just Miko always has these bullshit excuses and you seem to have her wrapped around your finger, so I thought, screw it. Do you want anything? I got all the freaking money in the world, so what can I do to pay you and Miko back for being an inconvenience? And quad. Izuku sighed, shifting his trapped arm around to get more blood flowing through the limb. He gave a sympathetic glance at the brunette. Part of him screamed what he was about to do was betraying the woman he loved, but another part reminded him what it was like to so mentally down with no one around. And if what Himiko said about how Kachan had isolated this poor girl even after they broke up years ago was true, she likely needed something more than he did at his lowest. Softly he wrapped an arm around her back and rubbed her left arm in as reassuring a way as possible. You aren't being that much of an inconvenience. If anything, Himiko should be glad to see you again, assuming you don't start pulling rank on her. She needs friends, as much as it pains me to say, and you're the closet one she has. In fact, the only one she has aside from me. And quad. He smiled at her like he wanted someone to when he was at his lowest, and to his credit, she certainly looked far less down on herself as he continued. You need people in your life that aren't just connected to your job. What you do is very important, but you're still human. Uraka. You need to be able to enjoy the company of people without always thinking of how they think about you. So it's okay if you want to hang out with us for a while. And quad. A slight blush came over him as he looked elsewhere than her eyes. But could you please try to leave before 8? Me and her have plans with each other, so ... And quad. The heroine pursed her lips for a moment and wrapped herself around his torso to reciprocate the consideration. To her credit as an athlete, there was quite the punch to her strength for a woman, and Izuku had to keep himself from saying anything when she rested her head on his chest as they walked. It didn't feel bad, but God did it feel wrong, even if he only did it from only a place of kindness. Her hand rolled over the length of his hoodie and she managed to speak something Izuku never would have ever expected anyone, much less such a highly regarded hero. Mind explaining what those plans with her are? I've always wondered what Miko gets up to with you and with how she is. I'm convinced it's either the sweetest thing ever or something out of a horror movie. And quad. Here he goes again, thinking everything is dirty and perverted. She was only asking about what date they would go on, right? It's rather intimate, so and quad. I don't care, tell me, ain't like she'll mind. And quad. He flinched at that, not believing anyone would ask something so indecent of someone they hardly knew. That's a private matter between Himiko and me, so and quad. She already told me about how you spread her legs after she beat the shit out of you. I'm gonna be told it eventually anyway, so just tell me. And quad. Another blush came over the man and he began to scan around him. She did have a point, and if Himiko actually is going to slip it to this girl, then why not? Maybe she even has tips for what they had planned. Lowering his voice and hoping Himiko never finds this out, he whispered, tonight we're going to try a little at using her backdoor, so to speak, since she's really against losing her virginity just yet. Personally, it pisses me off. But again, love is all about compromises, so it's a middle ground for us. And quad. Shame filled his soul, but so did some relief at finally being able to talk about this stuff with someone who wasn't Himiko or connected to his work. Ochaco stared at him for a moment and whistled. She really loves you then, because Himiko always has some pride about herself, but you, geez man, I'm not sure if I should clap or not, because you're making her into a lovesick fool. The fact alone she's willing to let you do something that nasty to her speaks volumes. Which reminds me, you guys did buy enough Vaseline, right? And quad. He raised an eyebrow at the woman. What? And quad. Ochaco halted and went wide-eyed at his dull expression. Lube, you idiot. Didn't you do any research ahead of time? If you don't prepare her right, you could really hurt her insides. And quad. Izuku withdrew a bit at her question, not sure how to feel about being accosted in such a way. But he knew it was made out of concern for his lover, so he wasn't too ashamed. Yet with it came a heavy indignation at the suggestion that he was willfully ignorant of how to tend to his darling. Yes, I did. I even went ahead and bought the stuff last night. And quad. Ochaco glared at him and reached into her back pocket. In her hand was her wallet, and in between her fingers was what had to be a debit card. Not that I don't believe you, broccoli boy, but for her sake I want you to go over there and buy a tub of that stuff, got it? Last thing anyone needs is her in the hospital over this stupid shit. And quad. She gestured to a nearby convenience store up ahead, which made Izuku all the more angry, but he reluctantly took her card and went inside. It took him a few minutes to find the gel. Yet for peace of mind it never hurts to be over-prepared, and less bullshit from Cheeky, as Himiko called her. It was worth it. Stepping out to the street where the stern-faced heroine was waiting, with crossed arms no less, Izuku handed her the card and the receipt for the purchase. Scanning the paper and bolstering her card, Ochaco proceeded to entrap his free arm again. Come on Greenie, let's not keep the luckiest unlucky girl in the world waiting. Pulling him along while the bag rested in his left hand, the pair resumed their journey, with the heroine suddenly seeming far more in thought as they went along. She glanced at him for a moment and broke the silence. What did you think life would turn out like for you as a kid? Like when you were little, how did you picture your life being ? Izuku thought for a moment and grimaced at the old memories as his scars started to burn. His whole body tensed, and with it came a flash of almost homicidal anger that he drowned quickly enough when he realized it was in the past. Depends, because when I was 3 I thought I'd be the next All Might. When I was 4 I thought I would be my abuser's sidekick. Then at the age of 15 I saw the fucker for who he was and kinda. He paused for a minute as a nostalgic smile came over him, his hand unknowingly reaching out for the heroine's before coming back to reality. I thought I'd be married and a marathon runner. Why do you ask ? Ochaco stared at him in silent contemplation, running her palm over his arm reassuringly like he had done for her before answering. Because I'm living the life I dreamed of, and I know it's close to perfect, and I love what I do, but it sucks so much in different ways. There I go again with the complaining. I'm rich enough to never work again, and here I am bitching that the sun isn't always shining. Izuku patted her on the arm gently and grinned sympathetically. You're allowed to vent like everyone else. Being a hero doesn't make you superhuman, so it's okay to scream at the world every so often. The brunette relaxed a bit at his words and clung a little harder. Let's just get to her place before it gets dark, okay? The journey finally concluded after what felt like forever when they arrived at Himiko's rundown apartment complex. Walking inside, they went up the stairs until they reached her number and knocked on the door. Izuku shifted himself out of the heroine's grasp and took a few steps to the left as the door swung open and the woman of the house stood in all her crusty glory. Himiko had worry written all over her face, but managed it well enough when she stepped to the side and gestured for them to enter. Come on in, you two. Noticeably she lacked her usual tanto knife, and Izuku didn't blame her, nor did he when she wrapped her arms around him like a lifeline when Uraka and him entered. Though he felt his heart drop when she started to sniff at him. Ochaco had made it to the living room after removing her shoes and surveying the decor, passively taking it in while the two lovers stood with more than a little territorial dread in their hearts. Glad to see you're keeping your place clean, Himiko. The former killer stepped forward, only to be harshly pulled back by her darling who held her possessively. Sighing at the situation, she spoke up in that tired, done way she hardly had since Izuku showed up. What did you want, cheeky? You're welcome to stay, but you hardly stopped by at all, so this is a little out of the blue. The anti-gravity user inhaled deeply, her face becoming almost plastic-like as she withdrew her wallet and took out her debit card. I want to eat, so Izuku, could you be a dear and go get us all some food? It's my treat, and take your time. I need to have a personal talk with Himiko for a while. The man turned his attention to the blonde girl in his arms. They made eye contact, and again came that resigned expression as she said with her eyes, I'll be alright. Just go. He scowled for a moment and dug his fingers into her skin, making painful red marks as he focused solely on her before she gently caressed his face. Begrudgingly he let go of the most important thing in his life and grabbed the lady's card. Ochaco kept that plastic smile on as Izuku approached the door, worrying him by the second as her voice came out in a monotone string. Just get whatever you feel like, I'm not picky. He took one last look at Himiko for confirmation that she would be alright before heading out the door and leaving the old friends alone. Ochaco remained where she was in the middle of the living room for a few seconds, then moved herself to the sofa and stared ahead at the wall. The blonde took a seat next to her savior, having seen this behavior from her in the past. The hero reached out and grabbed her torso for support, placing all her weight on the villain while a hand ran through her short-cut hair. Feeling oddly maternal, Himiko let her friend be and listened as the troubles came out. Would you hate me if I told you I'm jealous of your relationship and I resent it a bit? Like, I'm incredibly happy for you and I'm so proud of how far you've come from where we once were, and Izuku is a good man who I trust with you so far. Yet there's the thing, you have this wonderful, devoted relationship with a man who genuinely thinks the world of you. While I'm left alone, sad and childless. The brunette shook her head in disbelief at the way her life turned out. When Katsuki and I were an item, I genuinely thought he'd give me everything I could ever want if I just saved him from himself. That wasn't the case, and it wasn't anyone's fault. But I've just been alone for years now while the man I loved goes insane. Nobody touches me, nobody loves me, and I just keep working and working so goddamn much because people need me until my body gives out. While you get an easy life making gossip columns and a man who wants you so badly, I don't think I could actually put it into words. A grip came to her arms as she stared into the eyes of the woman who tried to kill her countless times before inhaling a raspy breath. I love you, Miko, I really do, and I'll fight tooth and nail for you like I did in those courts so long as you don't repeat your mistakes, but it isn't fair. You get a boyfriend who loves you and the chance to be a mother one day while having enough free time to enjoy his company as I'm working myself into an early grave. And quad. Tears began to tease at the edge of her chocolate eyes as she hugged the other woman. I hate that you get everything while my life is fucked despite me doing everything for everybody. Katsuki was supposed to be the one, but he got ruined and now, he won't let me go. Nobody in the industry will approach me because they think it'll invite down his wrath, and the civilians just see my hero name and want to use me. I can't escape this fucking trap I've made for myself and in quad. She hugged the killer by the neck and squeezed as more tears came down. I'm so fucking alone. I haven't slept with anyone in years and I keep having nightmares that I'm going to become this withered, childless spinster with nobody around to comfort me all the time. To tell you the truth, I've even thought about your boyfriend when I was dealing with the itch, and it disgusts me because I know how much he means to you, but he's the only option I have now. Everyone else who might see me as more than a public figurehead is completely terrified of my ex, and every other sort of person I've tried to court just ends up abandoning me. And quad. She was starting to cry in earnest and move her hand from the neck to the girl's torso. He's the only person that I can think of where it won't end badly. I've even thought about that time where you and I kissed. And quad. Her head was now in Himiko's chest as she broke down to a sobbing fit while the blonde caressed her scalp. The slasher spoke in a low, soft tone like she had done for Jin, Tomura, Toya, and Izuku, not judging her in the slightest. What are you trying to ask here, sweetie? And quad. Ochaco continued to sob and hold on to her only lifeline with an iron grip as they both began to float in the air above the sofa. I want to have a boyfriend who loves me and wants to be a father, but if I can't get that, then I just want someone who loves me as a person to touch me. Himiko, I don't care what you do, but can you have Izuku touch me? Or if that's too much, then can you do it? I wouldn't ask if I saw another good option, but I don't. You two are the only help I can think of. And quad. She should have been shocked, outraged, violent even, and to a degree she was, excluding the last one. Her golden eyes passively regard the information calmly despite her inner world being thrown into chaos. She continued to soothe her oldest and only ally from the worst time in her life and held in her bafflement. Chiki was her friend, her savior even, and she'd fight to the death for her, but to hear that? She had always loved the girl and been attracted to her. Even now Himiko found her incredible to look at. Though she found she preferred men a bit more, it wasn't that big of a difference. They all bleed the same after all. But she wasn't sure if she wanted Ochaco in that way anymore. Yes, she liked the idea of getting intimate, but it was only the idea. Now she had Izuku and that man did everything for her. Granted, she might like a little cutting to be thrown into the mix between them, but they'll get there one day, hopefully. She was dedicated to him and she had no mind to change that. Why would she when he was that devoted to ensuring her pleasure? Plus they made a promise to be loyal to each other, and God help anyone who tried to come between them. Yet at the same time, looking down at the crying heroine, Himiko couldn't help but feel pity and a fair amount of guilt. Here was a person who helped her against the whole world, and she was asking for some little pleasure because the demons of her past haunted her. If anyone could understand, it was Himiko. But she wouldn't allow the idea of simply handing over her Zuzu, and she wouldn't betray his trust. Shit. If she was 10 years younger, then she would have just been ecstatic at getting two people together who loved her, but even then she wasn't a cheater. She didn't want to say no to her friend, and Izuku told her exactly what he expected out of her, but Chiki wasn't a guy. He said he would never allow another man to touch her and that they were monogamous, which was fine. Yet if this was just a one-night thing between the three of them. Himiko cursed and got up from the couch. Fuck, if she outright said no, then Chiki might screw them over. It was unlikely, but it was still a possibility. And then there was how Izuku would react to the merest suggestion. That man loved her like nobody else, and she knew he would fight with every breath he had to keep her. Yet at the same time, it wasn't like she would be cheating on him since he'd be a part of it. Kicking the air and sighing while Ochaco looked on with tear-stained cheeks, Himiko groaned at the fact she'd need to have a very uncomfortable conversation with Izuku when he got back. And then, as if the very thought summoned him, the door swung open and he walked in with a big bag of fast food. He looked on in confusion at the scene, only to be grabbed by Himiko when the front door was locked and the food was set on the dining table. She didn't say a word as they marched towards her room, and once inside, the blonde threw him to the bed by flinging in with his arm and trusting the momentum behind his weight to do the work. She shut the door with an unreasonably loud slam and locked it with a deep huff. Izuku remained like a deer in the headlights as he slowly got up from the mattress. He tracked the tear stains on her shirt and recoiled slightly at the pain in her eyes. Moving forward, Izuku reached out to hold her, only for Himiko to push him aside and begin pacing around the room. Neither said anything for a time until the killer looked to her beloved with a heavy heart and placed both of her hands on his shoulders. Zuzu, I need to talk to you about something. And quad. Instantly he clutched at one of her hands while his expression was as if this was life or death. With it came the surge of almost psychotic devotion that blazed in his soul. What is it? Did she hurt you? And quad. Himiko shook her head and stepped closer. No, nothing like that. But while you were away, Cheeky broke down and told me about some things that had been bothering her. So I need to ask if you would be okay if ... and quat. Every ounce of conviction and devotion she had flamed and burned the sensations of obligation to her savior. Yet the fear and guilt still lingered in her heart as she pictured Ochaco alone and broken. Gritting her teeth and deciding to do something in this impossible situation, she finished her statement. We, you and I as a team, not just one of us but the both of us at the same time, go out there and make Ochaco feel good ... and quat. There was conviction in her voice and Izuku stared at her dumbly for a few seconds before the meaning hit home. His eyes went wide as he let go of Himiko's hands and shoved her to the floor. There was a fuming, low blazing anger in his eyes as he glared at her with what only had to be the fury of betrayal. Are you fucking insane? There's no way either of us are doing that, and if you are then I'm gone and never coming the fuck back ! And quat. He stepped back to grant her some distance from himself as he held up his index finger. One thing I demanded of you. One thing I absolutely had to have and I was yours to do with as you fucking please. It was that you do not fuck anyone else and you go on ahead and ask if I'd be okay if we both got naked and screwed this girl, who is intoxicated by the way! And quat. Himiko caged the bridge of her nose between her hands and controlled herself. Izuku loved her, probably more than she knew judging how pissed he was. That was why she wasn't angry. In fact he had a damn good reason to be pissed. Devil knows she would be if he was the one asking. Calmly she moved herself to the side of the bed and put her hands on her legs which soon curled into fists as she bared her teeth for a second. Izuku, you have every right to be mad and I understand what you mean, but, Ochaco saved my life ... and quat. He threw his arms up in the air in bewilderment. She saved a lot of people's lives, that doesn't mean they have to sleep with her! And quat. Himiko inhaled and gazed up at him with a forlorn pain in her eyes as she patted the spot next to her. When Izuku didn't sit down, she stood up and pulled him by the wrist until he fell on the bed. He continued to glare at her, but lessened his fury when she clung to him. She nuzzled into his shoulder and held him tightly like he'd disappear. Izuku, you don't understand what I mean. And quat. She shook her head and clenched her fingers tight around his arms as the memory came back in full force. Back during the calamity after my boss got his head blown up by that asshole, I managed to kill over 50 heroes. I did this for revenge since it was all I had left after the only people who considered me family died. Once that was mostly done with and I felt the police closing on me by the day, so I chose to end it all before those fuckers could reach me. Since I lived my way, I may as well die my way. And quat. She continued as she clung to her lover. I had said a final goodbye to this world and had the knife in my hand, ready to plunge it into my neck while I stood there wet in the blood of the last person I murdered, completely nude. Yet right as I was about to end it all, the door to the shithole I was hiding in swung open. One person stepped in and it was Ochaco. She was horrified to see me, but instead of running in to capture me or kill me, she just stared. And quat. Himiko leaned more on Izuku with her grip becoming unnaturally strong. Normally I would have smiled and tried to kill her, but I guess due to the shock or how done I was with everything, I just stared back. We stayed like that for a while and that bitch had the heart to have the first thing she said not be "You're under arrest." And quat. Or "This ends now." And quat. Or "I'm going to end your villainous ways." And quat. Or "Time to make you pay." And quat. Instead she looked at me with those brown eyes and said, "Are you okay, Himiko?" I had tried to kill this girl over 10 fucking times and she still fucking cared. And quat. Her voice broke a little as she continued. I remember looking at her and shaking until the knife fell out of my hand and then I just cried. I cried and cried and cried while that fucking angel held me. She had kicked the knife away beforehand, but she just stayed there with me until I could function and then we talked. We talked about everything and before long Ochaco had started to smile like everything would be alright. She asked if I wanted to start over, if I wanted to keep on living for the sake of my old friends and those I hurt, and I said yes. And quat. A slight tremor came over the former slasher when she recalled what happened next. She told me that I could still have a life and move past my mistakes if only I let her help. I didn't have anywhere else to turn and in that moment she was like a sigh from above, so I took her hand and turned myself in. That girl visited me every chance she got, even when that fucker was living with her, and helped me build a case for my appeal of parole. It was because she backed me up in court, at the risk of her reputation and trust with the HSPC no less, that I'm not rotting away in some fucking cell. And quat. A glint of fury came over the blonde as she saw that innocent, heavenly face sobbing over the man who ruined so much of both their lives. She has always been on my side and now she's telling me how because of her dedication to saving people and helping the world, including the bastard who burned you, she is scared of dying alone. Ochaco came here because it's the only place she knows is safe and that the people here love her. It's been years since she had any intimacy with anyone and begged me to have you make her feel good since she trusts my judgment about most people. And quat. Himiko pointed a finger under his chin as she made damn sure he was looking in her eyes. But there's also a practical reason for it. That woman has essentially complete control over my life and so far she's been nothing but benevolent. That can turn sour after some time of bitter resentment, and she's already admitted to being jealous of what you and I have. You need to consider just how low her mental state is by the sheer fact she was willing to come here and admit that to me. She didn't threaten to have me thrown back into Tartarus, but right now she's hurting, and that can be used as motivation to ruin my life. Now I trust Ochaco with my very soul, but you never want to get on the wrong side of the people in charge of making sure you're alive. And quat. Her hands gripped the sides of his face and brought it close. I swear to you on my life and on the soul of Jin that I will never have relations with any other man so long as you are by my side, and if you want to have children with me and make me your bride, then I'll accept that one day. I'll remain loyal to you and you alone as the only man in my life, but Izuku, I'm asking you to please go out there and help the woman who saved my life. I'll be with you every step of the way, and I'll even make you feel good too. And quat. Izuku was at a loss for words. He was still pissed, but at the same time he was beyond grateful to the heroine for saving his Himiko. This girl meant the world to him, and Uraka had helped her go beyond her circumstances and earn her freedom back. So he didn't loathe the brunette, but still, of all the things to ask for in a lifetime of service to society and to being the girl's guardian angel, why intimacy? Much less with him of all people? He wasn't a sexual dynamo, at least he didn't think so. A part of him was genuinely flattered and around to be desired, but the woman in front of him brought on far stronger emotions. Yet Himiko had a point. Uraka could send Himiko back to Tartarus with a simple phone call or a text even, and if she had jealousy eat away at her enough to confess to a former assassin, then it had to be fairly strong. The police could come and he would never see Himiko again. He'd be alone again without her in the world. Normally he would have considered grabbing the curtains and strangling the heroine to ensure his lover's safety, but the woman had done so much good for the world and literally helped reform his darling into the woman his dreams were now made of. It would just be a relatively quick thing, right? Get naked, tease the girl a bit, play with her until she climaxes, and that was it. It wasn't like another man was here, so he didn't need to murder someone on principle. Turning to Himiko, he glared at her and stood up. I'm not fucking her. I do the same shit I do to you, but my first time is going to be with you. This isn't up for debate. Also, I want you to let me fucking take you already, maybe not tonight, but I'm going to pop your cherry or you are going to explain why you refuse to let me give you everything. And quat. Himiko let out a breath of relief and hugged him. I promise I'll let you use my butt tonight, but I just want you to know more about my past before I give myself. And quat. Izuku groaned in exasperation. Himiko, you just admitted to murdering 50 fucking people back in the day, right down to explaining how you carried it out, and I still want to make you a mother. What the hell could be so bad that you refuse to let me just take you? And quat. She pursed her lips and withdrew inward for a moment as her feline eyes gazed into him with a deep fear of abandonment. It was then her arms tried to force the air out of his lungs as she held on for dear life. I just don't want to scare you by telling everything before you see the big picture of why I did what I did. And quat. He placed a hand on her head and rubbed softly for a moment, smiling as kindly as he could before turning to glare at the door. All right, I can wait a little longer. For now, let's get this over with. And quat. The door was unlocked and the two stepped out to the living room where the anti-gravity hero was waiting on the couch, violently twiddling her thumbs while keeping her eyes on the floor. Gauging the woman, Izuku shook his head in a mix of emotions and turned his eyes to Himiko, who looked absolutely apologetic. Taking a place on the empty love seat, he felt most of the anger leave him and it be replaced by a sense of cunning? If that was the right word to use, he certainly felt it as he gave a comforting smile that said everything is all right. And quat. Not in the overly bombastic way like All Might used to do, but in a more subtle, quiet way. And to his surprise it had the desired effect as the brunette stopped looking down and stared right at him. It was reserved and filled with shame, but it was damn clear she didn't want to be anywhere else by how much she tensed at his glance. Not to be undermined by this, Izuku leaned forward and put his overlapping hands in his lap as he gave the most calm and easy tone as he tried with great effort not to make an ass out of himself. So Uraka and quat. The heroine cut him off with an almost demanding ring to her words as she kept looking him in the eye. Ochaco. You can call me Ochaco. And quat. He kept the smile on and laughed a bit to ease the mounting tension in the room. Alright, Ochaco it is. Now, Himiko has told me something rather interesting that pertains to why you decided to pay us a visit tonight. She said you were in need of some, let's just call it physical help, and wanted her and I to give you that help so you won't feel so alone. Is that correct? And quat. The heroine nodded as if it was plain as day. Yes it is. I'm not proud of it, but you two are the only people I trust to be that vulnerable around. Miko has earned my faith despite what she once did, and she adores you to such a point that I can see why now. Izuku, you're a good man with a good heart and I trust you with Miko, but you're also the only man I can think of that wouldn't abuse that secret. I've been celibate for years now, and so far I've just been working until I collapse with no one around to take care of me in that way. And quat. She eyed him intensely like every word meant the world to her. That's why I'm bearing my soul to the both of you. I don't want to become a lonely old lady, and I would rather die than give myself away to any chump who shows interest in me like some no-class whore. I value Miko's word above all else, and if she deems you to be worthy enough to take her maidenhood and you've shown me how much you earnestly care for her, then I can accept giving myself to you. It'll be hard at the start, but I know it'll work out between us, and Miko can be right there with us both loving her. And quad. Never ever in his entire fucking life did Izuku imagine a situation where he was given that statement. It raised so many questions, like namely, was this woman just looking for a one-night thing or a goddamn relationship? He turned his gaze to Himiko, who looked almost as flabbergasted as he felt. In a strange way he felt incredibly prideful to be the object of desire for two beautiful women, but he still clung to his devotion to the woman who saved his own life and made him want children. Running his hands through his hair with an uneasy smile, Izuku met the fiery eyes of the rescue hero, which was burning with such determination that it practically dared him to try and deny her. Shit, there really was no way out of this but through, wasn't there? Again he looked at Himiko, who stared back with shamefully guilty eyes, but he also a spark of excitement, as if saying, go ahead, I'm right behind you. And quad. He inhaled deeply, not quite sure what cosmic coin flip had to happen to have the night turn into this. Turning away from his beloved, Izuku stared at the brunette with resigned, yet admittedly wanting eyes. Alright Ochaco, since you've done so much for Himiko and that you've been nothing but upfront with the both of us, we'll be willing to grant your wish, on the condition you accept some ground rules. And quad. A stone seriousness set itself upon the girl as she scooted to the edge of the sofa, looking as if she was listening with every ounce of herself and ready to pounce. I promise. Now what are your rules? And quad. The man pursed his lips and thought for a moment as a flood of embarrassment came over him, only to be banished by a bullish excitement at finally being able to take charge. Firstly, nothing that happens here leaves here. This is strictly between the three of us and nobody else needs to know. Secondly, I'm not going all the way with you since I haven't done it with her yet. If you can't respect that, then we're done. Thirdly, and quad. He stood up and turned to Himiko, making sure she was looking right at him. You don't do anything rough with her. No biting, hitting or anything like that. If you want to be rough, then tell me and I'll let you handle it with me and she sits out until we're done. Okay? And quad. A smile teased at the edge of the killer's lips as she nodded. Like I'd use anybody else for that. You have the tastiest blood and you make such adorable faces when I hurt you. Anything other than you would be a letdown. And quad. Izuku rolled his eyes and returned his attention to the heroine. The last and most important thing is that we have a tap word. You say it if things get to be too much and we'll stop, but you gotta do the same for us if we say it. Now I want you to repeat after me, pineapple. And quad. To the woman's credit, she was taking this well, maybe a bit too well. Pineapple. And quad. Izuku gave a thumbs up in approval. Good. If either of us says that word during it, then you gotta stop and back away. Now again, pineapple. And quad. Ochaco leaned back into the sofa, looking more ready by the second. Pineapple. And quad. Izuku said it one more time. Pineapple. And quad. The brunette finished the remembrance ritual with a tone that sounded sure and beyond strong as she kept her focus purely on the man. Izuku nodded and turned to Himiko, who was now full on rosy, beaming with an admittedly sick pride at how well her baby handled easing Ochaco in. The two lovers repeated the ritual and soon there was nothing but silence in the air as all three stared at each other, waiting to see who would break the ice. Getting up from the sofa, Izuku positioned himself in the middle of the living room, deciding to get this over with sooner rather than later. He smiled sheepishly at the heroine, who watched him with rapt attention as he grabbed the underside of his shirt. Just to let you know, I have some pretty nasty scars, so just be aware of that. And quad. He pulled it up and threw it to the ground as his partly charred skin was displayed for the two to see. The old, blackened skin popped with slim muscle as a result of his training, causing Ochaco to get up from her seat with a silent gasp and reach out to touch the injuries that littered some of his upper torso. What happened? And quad. Izuku flinched a little as her fingers began to run over his skin, but he remained sociable enough as he kept a smile on. You remember that abuser I had when I was little? Well, this is his handiwork from back in the day. And quad. The woman studied it for a minute and then stared up at him with an expression he couldn't place as her inhumanly soft hands gripped the side of his face. Whoever did this to you is a piece of shit, but I swear to you, Izuku, you won't have to ever worry about that again. You have Miko and me now. Okay? And quad. He would have responded to that with an awkward thanks or the like, but he never got the chance since Ochaco moved her hands to the back of his head and kissed him. Her tongue had slipped inside his mouth and was wrapping and moving around like it owned it. All the while her padded hands moved downward and caressed his torso, feeling every bump and growth of the scars along the tingling of new muscle. So tight and hard as iron that she couldn't help but bring her waist over and rub against his legs. Izuku regained some of his functions and gently laid his hands in her armpits and pushed her back as carefully as he could. His body was on fire now and it showed, but he had to stay civil. Smiling down at the heroine, he let out a laugh. Easy now, let's just get into the pace of things. Let me finish getting my pants off and then I'll help you out of those clothes and then I'll get Himiko. We don't want to ruin this by rushing, right? Ochaco? And quad. The brunette nodded as heat manifested in her breath and her heart started to race. She looked over to the corner where Miko was standing, grinning that perverse smile, and in response she gestured with an index finger for her to come closer. The blonde grinned even more and approached the two, not interrupting the show Izuku was trying to put on, but enough for her to join in soon enough. The green-haired man himself took notice of how his lover was looking at both him and the girl and felt his own need rise as he undid the buckle on his belt. His pants and undergarments fell to the floor, exposing his lower half to the two and presenting his family rod in all its glory. Ochaco eyed his member with an appraising gaze and reached out to grab it before he could say anything. It was thick and veiny with a decent girth to it. It's bigger than Katsuki ''S. And quat. She absent-mindedly thought out loud as her thumb rolled over the head of his shaft. Blinking at this information, Izuku erased the image from his head as he began to reach out to the woman. He removed her jacket first and then, gently, slowly, raised up her shirt and removed it. A black bra greeted him along with the smell of sweat as Ochaco looked at him eagerly. Slipping his hands around the top of her back, he undid her garment with ease as the fabric fell to the floor. Izuku knew from the outset Ochaco was big, but her breasts were unreasonably big for someone of her size, around the size of grapefruits, whereas Himiko's were roughly around the size of apples. Though it was also clear she had quite a bit more fat on her body, which she wore exceptionally well, than Himiko, so that might be the reason. Her nipples were also unusually large in comparison, taking up a good portion of her breasts, enough that they could easily fill Izuku's palm, which they did when he fondled them for a moment, taking note of the weight before sliding his hands down her torso until they landed on her jeans. He teased at the rim of her pants, snaking his hands past her belt line and through her panties as he groped her ass. Compared to Himiko, there wasn't nearly the same amount of muscle, but the size was in a whole other league as his fingers sunk into the flesh. Moving his hands around as he began to work it like dough, Izuku dragged his fingers around her thighs until they landed right in the front, directly behind the pin of her jeans. Flipping his hands around as he felt a warm and moist spot, Izuku began to slot in a finger, then two as his other hand and thumb undid her pants. There was the sensation of wet hair all over his covered hand, and he found out why when he removed her panties. The brunette had quite a bit of unkempt hair over her womanhood, as well as her legs, but right now nobody cared. Ochaco was moaning and whining out old sounds that made Izuku want her more as he worked on her with his fingers while she caressed his chest and ass, pulling them out with a slow yank as her walls began to contract around his fingers. Izuku gripped her hard on the butt, squeezing and pulling her towards him while his other hand lifted up her chin. The tip of his shaft teased at the entrance of her body and before it actually went partly in. Only the head played at the beginnings of her insides, but he was bringing it in and out slowly to generate some friction on her pleasure nerves while he looked her dead in the eye. His hand caressed her cheeks while the other continued to play with her rear, even teasing her back in trance a bit as he leaned his head to the side for a moment once he knew she was gazing at his soul. His tongue explored the rim of her ear for a brief second before he whispered with a hot, desire-filled voice that made her head feel fuzzy. "What do you want tonight, Ochaco? Speak it in Himiko and I will make your fantasies a reality. All we ask is that you don't go anywhere else for this, understand? As of this moment, you're ours since you bare your soul to us. We own it now. Your pleasure, your pain, your sorrow and love, it belongs strictly to us. If you go to anyone else, bring anyone else here or forget to return the pleasure we give, then this'll never happen again and Himiko and I will stick only with ourselves. Now say what you want. And quat. She shivered at his words, feeling every bit of desire and need flow through his voice while her pussy was teased again and again as he brought his tip out of her and dragged the length of his manhood over it like a snake. Ochaco began to shake her hips back and forth as gazed into those green eyes which promised to devour every bit of her. She raised her hand up and brought it down hard with a smack as she felt the texture crash against her palm while daring to look back at Miko, who was staring back with predatory eyes as she waited on the sofa, playing with herself as the room filled with the smell of ecstasy and bodies. Izuku got her attention instantly when he stopped. Her head snapped back like a brace as she saw him staring with a playful raised eyebrow. His hands began to agonizingly slip off her body in the meantime, causing the heroine to crush herself against him in an effort to keep his touch on her. "Yes, I won't go to anyone else but you too!" And quat. He grinned as he started to tease her womanhood again, watching her eyes go wide and her breath start to hitch as a warm, sticky sensation rested atop his cock once more. "You promise?" And quat. She began to grind furiously, perhaps out of a legitimate fear that he'll stop again while a fresh panic arose on her face. "I promise. I swear on my parents' lives I won't go anywhere else or to anyone else!" And quat. He was starting to really like this now, pulling back just enough so that there would be no resistance on her groin as she tried to add more force to the teasing. Izuku dragged his tongue on her earlobe again and brought her face to his as he held her by the chin. Why should I even let you near the woman I adore, the woman I cherish with my entire body and soul? You may have saved her, you may even have helped more than I can count, but who's to say you'll be of any use to us in the future? Himiko is mine and mine alone, Her body is for me to adore and mine is for her to abuse, but you? Do you think belonging to just the two of us, letting us bring you in and adore you the same way we do each other is something you're worthy of? For all the blood and pain, we are irreplaceable to each other. I plan to wed this woman one day, she will bear my children and we will make a life together regardless of anything that gets in our way. And quote. He dropped the grin and for once in his life appeared actually serious, almost a little threatening even as he halted his movements and grabbed Ochaco by the arms and pulled her close while he spoke in a snarl. Would you be willing to do the same for us? For me? For Himiko? Would you be willing to face any sort of hardship to make this work, or are you just going to run out and abandon the both of us after we gave you everything? And quote. The mood died for the two as she stared at those furious, devoted eyes. It reminded her of Katsuki in so many good ways and she felt her heart flutter at the question. She clearly wasn't thinking right, but she didn't want to. All she wanted was to love and be loved again. So she grabbed his face again and spoke in equal intensity. Yes, I will. I have done nothing but sacrifice my entire life for people, and while I'm happy to give, for once I want to get it in return. I want to never be alone again for as long as I live, and if you and Miko will give me everything then I'll return it 1,000-fold. I want a family and children with people I love, and I love Miko and I'll start to love you just as much. Izuku, I've already started and I only want more. I will be faithful till my dying day if you both will do the same for me! And quote. The fury faded from Izuku's soul as he contemplated the heroine's words. His face was utterly neutral, but his hands caressed her skin once more as he glowed with an acceptance. Placing his lips by her ear, he whispered into her spirit. That'll be enough. Now, tell us what you want. Say it loud and look her in the eye when you say it. And quote. Ochaco shivered as he started to touch her again, though a string of guilt fought the arousal when she met Miko's eyes. Biting it back, she spoke her desire, hoping Izuku heard how much this meant to her. I want to make a baby tonight. My desire is to have a family before I'm 30, and I want you and Miko to always be a part of my life because I can't stand another day alone. I don't care whatever sick shit you want to do to me, just stay by my side and make me a mother one day. Use me and abuse my body like the disgusting bitch I am so that this empty feeling will leave me and that I'll know you two will always take care of me. Please, I need this before it's too late. And quote. There wasn't an ounce of shock on the killer's face. Himiko merely smiled a fang-bearing grin that spoke volumes about her joy. Izuku on the other hand was far more kind as he turned Ochaco's face back towards him and kissed her deeply. He withdrew eventually and dragged his thumb lovingly across her cheek. We'll see, for now it's Himiko's turn. And quote. The man who just rocked her world in a fashion Katsuki had never done before and with a comparable amount of passion, turned around and approached one of the worst serial killers/villains in generations while Ochaco was left wanting much, much more. Miko grinned slyly at her, removing the rest of her clothes and watched the one in her eyes explode as Izuku sat down on the couch. Instantly there was a massive difference in mood with how he approached Miko compared to her. There was a lingering hesitation, yet an unbreakable familiarity as he crawled over her prone body with a dick so hard it looked like it could break bricks. Miko was smug about it as her hands rolled over his body, touching every inch of him as he stared down with a frightening level of devotion in his eyes for the murderer. Slowly he began to kiss her neck, running his fingers through her golden locks while he moved up and played with her lips and touched every part of her body, even spreading open her privates as he placed 2 fingers inside. I'm sorry if I kept you waiting. She needed my attention and quote. A finger was raised to his lips as a few grunts and moans slipped out of Miko's throat with a smile. Baby, there isn't anything to apologize for. Shiki is ours now, so you're doing everything you need to. It'll just be us 3 from now on. Just relax and let your body take over. And quote. The fervor at which she was getting played with by the man who adores her was increasing, making a strangely arousing, yet disgusting sound as Izuku felt her reactions to his passion which egged him on further. He had kissed her, forcing his tongue inside before Miko pulled away with a grin. I need a little something more tonight, darling. It's nothing too bad, but I promise the both of us will feel good. And quote. A tremor came to his voice as he withdrew his fingers from inside her, which were wet and sticky with her love to a degree that put Ochaco to shame. He gripped the back of her skull and started to suck and kiss and lick all the way down her body, even enveloping her nipples in a somehow violent way as all his passion was laid bare and screamed for release. Hey, are you gonna bite me again? Please, I like that more than the punching. And quote. Miko giggled and gripped his head before it reached her womanhood, digging her fingers in his hair and gently raising it up. Oh, somebody greedy tonight. And quote. She scooted herself upright on the sofa and moved her hands to his chin, as he instantly got closer. Miko's smile grew twice as large and she wrapped a hand around his junk which stopped him dead in his tracks. Don't worry Zuzu, that'll come later. Though Chiki is gonna help me get to blow, alright? Now, I need to go get the supplies from the kitchen. Is there anything sexy you want me to wear while I'm up? And quote. If ever there was a stupid question uttered by that girl, it would have to be that one, since this green-haired bastard wrapped his arms around her and started to fondle and kiss on her while she walked to the kitchen. It was like watching an animal go at it as Izuku clung to her hips and torso, passing his fingers here and there while pressing his cock against the entrance of her body. Miko looked beyond happy at this development with how rosy her cheeks were and how much she smiled, but aside from a few loose moans she tried to stop, she went about her task as Izuku obsessively possessed her body. He was everywhere on her, nibbling and slapping and sucking any square of flesh he could find while doing his damnedest to get it inside her without actually getting it inside her. From Ochaco's perspective it was more than a little concerning and frightening. Even Katsuki at his most passionate or heated was never that into her. The look in Izuku's eyes as they walked back with a first aid box was another layer of how much this man practically worships Miko. She was sure he could get smacked in the face with a crowbar and he'd still press himself against her like it was the meaning of his existence. He did detach from her once they sat back down, but the way his family scepter just pulsed told the heroine that it was going to be a short reprieve. Checking the kit and sorting it out, Miko pulled up the emergency number on her phone and set the device next to it on the coffee table. Turning around, the slasher gave a smile that Ochaco had seen before, one that used to horrify her, as Himiko pushed Izuku down gently as she rolled a hand down his face. I promise it won't be too long, less than a few minutes really, because we still need to take care of our number 3 over there. But I need you to shut your eyes for a minute Zuzu because I want to try something new today. And quat. Fear flashed on the quirkless man's face, yet he was still ready for action. Leaning back, Izuku looked up at his beloved for some reassurance. What do you have in mind? And quat. Grinning the demented smile, the blonde pulled a razor blade from the first aid box and sealed it over her thumb, parting the skin and making it weep a little red. I just want to make one little cut on that adorable body of yours to see how you like it. I'm gonna slice it over the skin right here near your side. It won't be deep enough to be in any danger of clipping an artery, but it should if you leak out some blood for me to sip on. Then I'll put it away and rip that pretty neck open. Okay baby? And quat. To Ochaco's endless surprise, Izuku did not immediately cover his junk and push the girl off him, but instead glared at Miko with a more fear-laden desire. Alright, but just one time tonight with the razor, and please kiss me while you do it. And quat. The more sadistic smile of the woman lessened as she ran her hand through his hair lovingly. Briefly Izuku sat up and hugged her, rubbing her back as he nuzzled into her shoulder as if he had missed her for a long, long time. Pushing him back down slowly, Himiko gave a soft smile as she continued to feel his curls. Sorry Zuzu, I need to focus on what I'm doing because otherwise an accident might happen. And quat. Izuku laid himself flat and stared up at the ceiling with disappointment ripe on his face. He reached out a hand and Miko placed her empty one in his as she mounted his legs. Soon Izuku began to kiss the knuckles and Himiko rubbed herself against his shaft for a moment, before leaning forward and rubbing her finger over the spot she specified. Ready Zuzu? And quat. He shut his eyes and put both his arms over her back, running them up and down as he mentally prepared himself. Go. And quat. Without another warning, Himiko brought the razor blade over the middle of the area under his right pectoral muscle and did it slowly and evenly as a quiet, sharp inhale of pain came from Izuku as he clung hard to her back. His face twisted in agony for a moment and Miko grinned possessively at his reaction. The blade was slick with crimson as it was put on the coffee table with a thumb as the steel touched the wood. There was a high-pitched, babyish tone to the girl's voice now as she watched her lover slowly get over the initial stab of pain and coast on the afterset as air and bacteria entered the wound that leaked a safe amount of red on the sofa. Grabbing him by the head, Himiko kissed him deeply before petting him in a rather disturbing fashion given what just happened. Good job Zuzu, you didn't give up and see? The worst of it is over. Now how was it? And quat. Opening his eyes, Izuku placed a finger over the cut and grimaced as he touched it. His member softened a bit, but he had to have been exposed to enough pain to not completely lose it. He shrugged and began to hold Miko close. Honestly, the fact it was a razor made me a little worried. Not that I don't trust you, of course, it's just that stuff can mess up a lot more if things go wrong. I'd much rather if you just bit me. And quat. A slight bit of hope entered the babyish tone of the villain as she rubbed her cheek against his face. But if I asked in the future? And quat. He was firm and unyielding as he regarded her, not letting any of his love cloud his judgment. I'm gonna have to say a hard no to that. And quat. Himiko pouted but then shrugged as she ran a finger, her bloody thumb to be exact, over the cut. Well, thank you at least for letting me try it out with you. Now then, cheeky, come here. And quat. Ochaco flinched at hearing her be mentioned as she was still reeling from what she saw. Approaching with more than a little hesitation, she watched as Miko wrapped herself around his torso and licked a dented spot near his neck. Alright, so here's the deal. We help this hunk of a man finish, and to do that I'm gonna nibble on him and you're gonna work his shaft with those big jiggly titties you got. Once Zuzu fires off, we're gonna take a break for a few minutes and then we'll focus on you. Understand? And quat. The heroine nodded sheepishly as she knelt down, feeling ashamed and excited at the same time while Izuku placed a hand on both her head and Miko's arm. Then before either of them could start, Izuku sighed and stood up. He got up without any issue despite the 110-pound woman on his back and gestured for Ochaco to stand up. His voice was frank and to the point, like he had enough of both of their bullshit. That isn't gonna be enough for me. Darling, I want you to bite me nice and quick. Keep sending the teeth in and out. Ochaco, how flexible are you? Inquat. She stuttered for a moment at how quick the room had changed. Pretty flexible. I can do the splits no problem. Why? Inquat. He then squatted down and scooped her up bridal style and pushed up against a wall. Keeping her pinned by pushing, he moved his hands in one rapid motion to the crook of her legs and, for lack of a better word, folded her, with her pussy dangling down while her feet were above her head. He leaned forward and kissed her as her eyes popped from feeling his dick run up against her slit again. His eyes spoke of annoyance now at having to wait this long, and he was directing all that frustration at her. It was at that moment she knew this was well fucking worth it. He saw the spark in her eyes and grinned. Ready? Inquat. She nodded and Himiko bit into his shoulder. It was a quick, hot feeling that made her head buzz as he thrust his hips with all his weight and muscle behind them to slide his manhood just at the start of her body. More than once she felt it push past by a small amount and have her walls try and wrap around the head of his cock, only to be left wanting as he grew faster and faster. The smell filled the apartment and Ochaco was getting more turned on by the second as he began to kiss her again. Blood dripped down his back as Himiko made small, wider bites in the wound to spread it by a little bit each time, and she was loving it. Such a devious thing to do with the man she adored, and she couldn't wait to start playing with Cheeky. But she paused for a moment as she saw what was going on down below. She wanted to say something, but it wasn't like they were actually fucking, so it's fine, right? It wasn't like she was suddenly scared Zuzu would get mad at her and decide to just skip the pretense and screw Cheeky. Okay, have a little faith in the man at least. But they both talked about how badly they both wanted kids, and they clearly had chemistry, while she had not rejected his desire, but made it much more complicated with her bullshit. Suddenly Himiko felt a stone drop in her chest and began to bite with a renewed favor to try and please him in her own fucked up way. Meanwhile, Ochaco could feel how close he was getting from how much his thing throbbed, and she wanted nothing more than to shake her hips for him. He was smiling at her now in an animalistic way that scratched something deep in her brain that made her moan a little louder while he followed suit. Before long, as he was getting fast enough to burn the skin from the friction, she felt him pop right under her entrance with enough force that his legs buckled for a moment. He was shaking now and struggling to hold her up, along with Miko, who was biting with a frenzy. The blonde stopped when they moved and she saw the spot on the wall, along with the bit that had gotten caught in the heroine's pubic hair. It looked like he had actually finished inside her when all of them knew that to not be the case, but Himiko still gripped him more possessively. To the man's credit, he managed to fall safely on the ground by taking a knee and setting Ochaco on her feet like she weighed nothing before rolling to the ground right as Himiko got off his back and spasming for a moment as his muscles all contracted for a second. He was beyond out of breath, but he was grinning like the happiest man in the world as he stared up at the two women. Hey, alright, you two go relax for a few. I'm gonna take a 20-minute break, and once I'm back to stuff, we'll keep going. By the way, Ochaco, be a dear and get some water from the fridge before I die of dehydration, please. Inquat. The brunette smiled warmly at the man and wordlessly made her way to the kitchen while Izuku stared at her crotch with an undeniable pride about him. Turning his head to his beloved, he extended his arms out to gesture for a hug, and she begrudgingly did so despite her mounting concerns. She wrapped her arms around him, letting her hands dig into his skin as she tried to banish the incessant whisper at the back of her head saying that he would. No, Zuzu isn't like those others. He would never abandon her. Looking at how he gazed deeply into her eyes and kissed her, all the while just radiating this sensation of I am madly in love with you. Inquat. That made her feel indescribably better. Though that reduction in anxiety lessened a bit when Cheeky came back with the water while her cooch was still dirty with his batter. She saw how he also had that look for Cheeky, not to the same degree, but he is certainly attached now. As if to add more evidence to this idea, the fucking bastard let go of her and stood up to grab this girl by the shoulder and helped her down to the ground. Granted, Cheeky was on the left side of him and she was on the right, so she still had a place. He wrapped his arms around them both as the two women did the same to him, two in utter, orgasmic bliss and one in far less high spirits than when she started. Standing up, Himiko opened the first aid kit and patted the seat next to her. Come on Zuzu, I gotta patch you up. Inquat. Izuku looked up at her with a slight annoyance at how she left his hold, but got up after kissing Ochaco on the lips, which made the girl giggle. Proceeding with the work, Himiko couldn't help but feel relieved when he reached down her leg for a moment before she told him to stay still. All the while he was grinning ahead at the wall while Cheeky looked on in morbid fascination at the procedure. Before long it was done and the puncture holes had been disinfected and stitched, which Izuku tested with a stretch. Turning around to face the two women, he was still looking like a happy idiot as he spoke. Valpe, time for another round in a bit. I'm gonna go bleed the lizard for a minute, you two do whatever. Love you both. Inquat. With that he turned and did as he said, leaving the pair to wait in what was supposed to be the afterglow. Except only Ochaco had any bliss about her as she grabbed the blonde villainess by the shoulder, looking like she had won the lottery. Jesus Christ, Miko, you never told me he could do that. We haven't even fucked yet and he still topped me off. No wonder you were so gaga over him. And quat. Himiko sighed and glared at the heroine before just coming out with it. Cheeky, can I be the focus when we start again? I know that sounds fucking petty, but he practically did get you pregnant with how often he almost fucked you. So can I just have both of your attentions this time? All I got was getting to slice and bite for a bit. And quat. Ochaco flinched at the term usage despite knowing damn well that's far from the worst thing she's said or done, but smiled nonetheless. Sure Miko, that's fine. But what exactly do you want me to do? Like I'm down with whatever, but I haven't been with a woman before. And quat. The blonde slasher pursed her lips and sighed. Come on, follow me before Mr. Supersperm gets out of the bathroom. And quat. The pair went into Himiko's bedroom and without skipping a beat she reached into her nightstand and pulled out a box of Plan B pills. Take these after we're done because I know that ape is gonna be all over the both of us. Now, as for what to do, it's basically the same thing Zuzu does. Kiss me, play with my pussy, that kind of, hold on. And quat. She reached into her nightstand once more and removed what could only be a bullet toy. Never really had much of a reason to bring this out with him around. But do you want to use it while we do this? And quat. Ochaco pursed her lips and grabbed it, glad it was clean. Do you want me to put it somewhere? Izuku has been telling me you guys are about to try anal. And quat. Himiko glared at her like the very fact insulted her. Why the fuck did he tell you that? And quat. The heroine shrugged. Because we both know you're gonna tell me the moment it happens, so I would already find out about it if he told me or not. Now to reiterate, do you want me to stick this up your ass? And quat. Himiko flinched at the question, genuinely taken aback by how upfront her angel was. Ochaco was stone-faced as she held the toy and before long the slasher had begun to laugh. Then the heroine started to laugh. This continued for a few minutes before Himiko waved a hand at the original question. I don't know, maybe. All you need to do is follow Zuzu's lead. If anybody knows how to please me, it's him. Don't worry by the way, this is a lot less rough than what he and I did. Also if things get to be too much, what do we say? And quat. Setting the bullet down, Ochaco got herself on the bed and gestured for Himiko to join. Pineapple, the safe word is pineapple. And quat. A hand patted her on the head as the more bloodthirsty of them then gripped her by the arms and made her fall backwards. Good girl, cheeky. Now let's get started before Zuzu starts trying to make a family lineage out of us. And quat. She was on top of Ochaco now and the two kissed. It was a strange sensation for the heroine to be kissing a girl, but she didn't fight it. She didn't exactly love it, but the sensation was stimulating enough that she started to grind her hips against Himiko's, who returned the favor in kind. Using her legs as leverage, the brunette softly flipped the both of them over and continued to kiss and grind on the woman who tried to end her at one point. Moving her mouth downward, Ochaco began to suck on the skin of her new lover while using her leg as an impromptu device to fight the tingling in her groin. Eventually she reached a nipple and suckled, finding a joy in how the villainess moaned and breathed. But both of them paused when the floorboards creaked and Izuku was standing in the doorway with the most shit-eating grin he'd worn in his life. Glad to see I'm just in time. Should I jump in or do you two need a minute? And quat. Himiko scowled as she pushed her savior to the side and crawled to the end of the bed. There was a petty anger in her eyes as she pointed to the center of the mattress. Stop fucking talking and come here already. You've been keeping us waiting for way too long. Now get started before I drag you into this bed! And quat. He laughed and approached the end of the mattress. Grabbing her head, Izuku kissed the woman he adored and pushed her down. It earned him a scowl, but she shut right up when he crawled on top of her prone self. There was an undying desire in those golden eyes for the man that loved her and he knew it. Yet he turned those wonderful, worshipping eyes to the third member and motioned for her to come over. Ochaco did as asked without hesitation and watched him with absolute attention while she stood on her knees to the right of the pair. Running his hands over Himiko's body, he watched as her anticipation grew and grew with each passing second. He made eye contact with the heroine and smirked proudly. This is the most lovely woman on earth and so far you've proven to be good enough of a girl to help me pleasure her. Now, you're going to be gentle and slow with her, planting your pretty mouth all over her body while I tend her down here. And quat. He shifted his hips, electing a small yelp of surprise from the blonde who remained quiet as he continued. Just start kissing her again and everything should fall into place. Okay Ochaco? And quat. The brunette blushed madly as his fingers held her chin and let go. She and Miko made eye contact and it was clear they both were equally overwhelmed by his presence, which only grew worse when she climbed on top of the blonde and lifted her ass in the air. Her voice was unusually quiet and tiny as she spoke, trying her best not to look Miko in the eye when she asked of him, "Can you eat me while I do it?" And quat. He laughed and caressed her rear. "That's not up to me. Ask Himiko nicely and I might." And quat. The two women made eye contact and the more criminally inclined one nodded as her hands gripped the more heroic one's arms for reassurance. Sure, that's fine. Shiki needs to feel good too. Quat. Izuku let out another laugh as he dug a thumb into Ochaco's pussy and heard her wince as her muscles contracted around it. If she was ever ready for action, it was now. She felt her eyes shut as something warm and wet bent its way inside her. She opened them and saw Miko having an even more exuberant expression as the sound of wet skin and hard friction came from right about where their hips were. Not knowing what else to do, she lowered her lips down and kissed her again while Izuku tended to them both. She reciprocated the response and wrapped her hands around her head. They got into a rhythm in tune with each other and soon the pleasures just melted together as they both got used to what Izuku was doing. But Ochaco halted right as she felt her muscles contract and a wave of even better ecstasy hit her. She felt Izuku pull his tongue out of her and he still caressed her a bit before he stopped teasing the killer. He bent down and started using his mouth which had the blonde making sounds Ochaco didn't know the girl could make before she was pulled to her as Miko's arms wrapped around her back in a bear hug. A scream came from the blonde as she reached completion, but moments later the crime fighter had to violently push herself up as the compress of teeth nested on her shoulder for half a second. Miko was still in the thralls of her pleasure and didn't have much awareness in the few seconds it took for her teeth to lash out at such a close range, so it wasn't her fault. Yet the troubles were far from over as Ochaco flinched when she felt something slip right on the cusp of her womanhood and start to move. She was still on top of the slasher so she definitely felt it as well, but it didn't last long until there came a spray of something warm and sticky shooting from where their bodies met and got up the front of their bellies. Something removed itself from their lower regions and with it came a gasp from Izuku as he fought to catch his breath. The brunette glared at him with an indignation of what he just did, but to her surprise Himiko looked positively in delight as she huffed away at the air. Still she set her mind because why not at this point? You shouldn't have done that. Quat. Izuku raised an eyebrow at the woman as he gained back most of his composure. Why? I made you guys feel good, why couldn't I? Quat. The hero eyed him for a moment. That's not the point, you didn't give us any time to prepare or even let us know what you were going to do. You of all people should know by now how important communication is in these situations. Quat. Izuku lowered his gaze a bit at her words. But there was such a build-up and I was doing the Quat. She cut him off. It doesn't matter how tired or eager you are. You have to tell the both of us when you want something like that instead of just doing it. Quat. He pursed his lips at her answer. But I did that to the both of you for the past 40 minutes. Why is it an issue now? Quat. There was another glare thrown his way by the crime fighter. Because we were both worn out and needed rest. We understand you need to get off too, Izuku, but you have to think of Himiko and I along with yourself. Quat. The green-haired man listened and shook his head at his actions. That was an oversight on my part. Quat. A third voice erupted out from under the brunette that made them both silent. Can we stop with the arguing and go to fucking bed? Zuzu went a bit too far, but so what? We all felt good. Now shut up and lay down before I have to get up and tie the both of you to the bedposts! Quat. The two heroes looked at each other and dropped the matter. Izuku moved himself to the right edge of the bed and kissed his beloved on the lips before walking to the other end. He climbed on and cuddled up to Ochaco who let bygones be bygones and turned to hold him as well. Instead of leaning into it however, he pushed her flat on her back and began to fondle her tits which was soon followed by another pair of hands which began to rub her belly. Himiko stared at her from the right and Izuku did so from the left as he whispered into her ear. You're ours now so we'll help you fall asleep the same way we do. Okay? Quat. In an instant there was the sensation of two people kissing and sucking at her neck. One traveled down to her chest and began to suckle on her breasts while another passively licked and sucked at the spot right over her jugular. Arms entrapped her as the two turned and held each other with her in the middle and soon Ochaco was finding herself drifting off to sleep as her body was enraptured in the warmth of her two lovers. It wasn't perfect and it may not be healthy, but to someone who had been alone for so long and was presented with something akin to an actual relationship she could have children from one day, with people this devoted to her, there wasn't a doubt in her mind as she closed her arms around the now sleeping pair, that this was the best decision she could have made. The only thing left to do was improve it and mold both herself and it until they all fit together as a family. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on the next episode.